Hey guys, you're about to watch our conversation with Dylan Burns on the subject of the Ukraine Russia conflict. It was a very interesting conversation. Dylan is a very interesting guest. We had I think it was a friendly debate. Um, we had a lot of disagreements, but it didn't ever seem like it was to the point of like, well, I hate you, you're a traitor, you're a Russia apologist, or anything like that. So I think it was pretty productive, pretty interesting, and pretty informative. And the chat seemed like it was split right down the middle. So I think it's kind of like almost a very ideal atmosphere for what you want for this kind of thing. I'm going to be embarrassed for a while because I called the currency of Russia rupees, or of course ruples. But whatever, I'll live. Anyway, before you watch this debate, I do have one request of you. I would like you to just pause this video for a second, click on that link down below that will take you to the Onion Nuggets channel. That is not this channel. There's a separate channel called the Onion Nuggets channel where we post clips from our show Onion Nuggets. And the reason we have a separate channel, we would love to post the clips on this channel, but unfortunately YouTube will not monetize anything on this channel, no matter how nicey nice it is. So we have a separate channel called Onion Nuggets. It's down below. We ask that you go and subscribe to that. We post new clips pretty much daily over there. We try to make it daily. So we appreciate your support over there. And if you want to see full episodes of Onion Nuggets, not have to worry about the clips, we do ask that you join our Patreon. With all that out of the way, please enjoy our long and I think very terrific discussion with Dylan Burns. Hey everybody, welcome to Onion Nuggets. We are here today with Dylan Burns, and Scotty has chickened out. Fears the burns, as I've said on numerous occasions. So Scotty's out. Had some lame excuse about it's my birthday. Get out of here. Quit lying. Piece of shit.
I can't believe he hates Ukraine. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
I can't believe after months and months of trying, we finally got Dylan Mulvaney to come on the show.
I'm happy to be here.
Yeah.
Finally,
Dylan Mulvaney is here. Or wait.
I have the long enough hair. I think I could pull it off.
So that Budweiser shit, pretty fucking crazy, right?
The thing that gets me about it, it wasn't even that big of a. It wasn't a big like promotion. I think they made like a single beer can and they gave it to her, right? And that was it.
Yeah.
Am I correct? That's all that was. I thought like they were putting her face on like every beer can or something with how angry everybody got.
No, it was like a thing that I think they only sent it to her. Like, I think they sent her like some special cans so that she could do like a promo, like, hey, look, my face is on a can. I don't think unless I'm mistaken, I don't think a single Dylan Mulvaney Bud Light was sold anywhere. I wonder how much she could sell that for now. The only Dylan Mulvaney can that could. Oh, if you had a Dylan Mulvaney can, I'd buy it from you.
I honestly, what she should do is she should sell it and she should market it as like, oh man, for like all those like rednecks who want to like go out and shoot it. That should be like the pitch, because you see how they all like destroyed all their Bud Light gear. They destroyed all their Bud Light. They would pour it out on stream, like pour it out on camera. She should pitch it as like, look, you can destroy the curse at the center of this whole wokeness. It is the can. It's like an old like Indiana Jones item. It's like, if you destroy the can, the wokeness shall be dispelled and the evil shall be defeated. And she should sell it like
gone from the lands.
Exactly. It's like I don't know if you ever played Red Dead Redemption, like the zombie version of it. There's like the zombie Red Dead Redemption. It was Red Dead Nightmare. But the end of the game, the way they stop the zombie curse is they returned an old Mayan artifact. So maybe if they take this Dylan Mulvaney can and like goes deep into the jungles of Mexico and put it one of those old Aztec buildings, they'll
sounds like Lord of the Rings at this point. Like they got to go destroy it in the factory that forged it or something.
Exactly. Yes, that's the only way you can stop the woke. The only way.
Makes sense to me. I admire your honesty, being putting the CIA asset thing right out there.
We're recruiting. We're recruiting. We're always recruiting.
I've been trying to get on the fucking payroll for a while. So
I don't think either one of us could pass the physical, TJ.
Oh yeah, that's true.
I think that's what's holding
I don't
back
even
our
think I could
applications.
pass the psychological or anything.
I know I couldn't pass the psychological
No.
for sure.
I think the CIA is I was told specifically because I do know people who have worked in intelligence agencies. I don't think I could ever do the type of work or be put under the microscope that you are put under once you work for one of these intelligence agencies. I mean, like you can't really be. I mean, if you have any criminal history, you're fucked. If you have any history with like drugs or like run-ins with the law, you're screwed. If you lie to them at all during the application process, you're going to be boned over. There's like a million reasons that they would stop you from working in the intelligence agency, but
you just
they're
listed
always
a bunch
recruiting.
of reasons why I wouldn't be invited, but
They're always recruiting though. So if you use my promo code Dylan Burns TV on their website, I get 10% of the commission. So just use that on the website.
Good to
Nice.
know.
Throwing his plug out there already. I like this guy.
So I was like trying to do I used to call Ukraine the Ukraine, but I guess that's not good anymore.
No.
What's wrong with it? The? I mean, it's the.
I understand this, Dylan. You can correct me if I'm wrong.
Right. Okay.
Calling the Ukraine,
right,
is kind of like calling the American South the South. It's insinuating that Ukraine is part of a larger body that is the former Soviet Union. Am I correct on that or no?
Basically, if you listen to Russian nationalists, they always use the term the Ukraine instead of Ukraine because
everybody here, not to interrupt you, but everybody in America up until about a year ago, I would say, used the Ukraine.
Yeah, I feel like when I used to talk about Ukraine, when I used to talk about Ukraine, I used to always say the Ukraine. No one ever fucking said shit, and then all of a sudden one day it was offensive to say the in front of Ukraine. I'm like, oh shit, what have I done?
The woke Ukraine mind virus. It's just it's very depersonalizing. They feel like it removes their autonomy in a way, that it removes themselves as their own like independent entity, and that they're kind of like under this umbrella of like a larger empire.
That doesn't make any sense
Empire.
because like if I put the in front of a person's name, if I was like to say like you are the Dylan Burns, that would be a compliment, right?
I guess if a person in a nation state, I do think it's a little different.
No, it's exactly the same. Don't bullshit a bullshitter, my friend. It's exactly the same. There's no difference there.
You know what? I thought I had a point, and then you proved me wrong. I appreciate that. I respect my elders.
That's what I do here.
Yeah, I mean, the Ukraine might slip out a few times tonight as we're talking.
Oh, I don't care.
It's one of those things.
Is this the girl everyone's mad at Bud Light over? Yes, that's right.
Yes.
I already made that joke, Danny, but you paid for it, so.
Well, they gave us money to make the same joke.
Yeah,
so
I know.
Fine.
It's
funny again.
Can I also say this is a very surreal moment? I've had a lot of these since I've started doing like media work. Yeah. I used to watch you guys when I was in like middle school, while like on my school computer. And I don't mean to do this to make you guys feel old, right? That's not my intention.
Where's that Sonny Jim? Huh? What you said?
But when I was in middle school, I worked at not worked at, but I went to a school where you had to be on computers all day. It was they integrate the computers and laptops and like iPads into education so much now. And any single time I would be like doing homework assignments or anything, I'd be listening to like the podcast as I was doing my work and like laughing my ass off in the corner of the classroom. So that's also why this is a very surreal experience to me. But I haven't listened to you guys probably in like, I don't know, like 3 or 4 years. So it's like opening up a little piece of the worst time in anyone's life, middle school.
Well, thanks for reminding us that we're both ancient and fucking withering old men. Yeah, no, it's always strange bumping into somebody that says that they listened to you in middle school, because the passage of time for me is a very strange thing. Like to me, like the Drunken Peasants was like last year, you know. I don't really make the distinction that it's been, you know, the better part of a decade.
And for me, it might as well have been like 1,000 years ago. So
we're on opposite ends of the spectrum, I guess, on that.
Yeah. People always talk about time moving really quickly, and to me, time is a slow bitch. He's really not fast.
It's I mean, I'm 22, so I'm relatively young, definitely for the type of work that I'm doing. Yeah. I've been streaming since I was 18, and I think it really feels like it's been forever for me. And I've only been streaming for like almost 4 years now. And the type of content that I did at the start of my streaming and the type of content that I do now has radically changed so much. It feels like a lifetime ago. Not to mention, it's a young time of my life. So, like, 18 and 22 is actually radically different. When it doesn't sound like a big time, those 4 years, but when you're that young, that is a tremendous time to change and grow as a person.
So, what made you? Are you Ukrainian by like
Ukraine, TJ? Remember,
Ukraine,
I,
right?
Ukrainian,
Yeah.
yeah.
I
it's
established
Ukraine
Ukraine.
I
Are
am
you-
not. I'm 0% Ukrainian.
now. Okay,
I-
so like, so why you like going there so much? Are you there right now?
Yes,
I
I'm
can't keep track of
currently-
where the hell you are.
I'm currently in my Kiev studio. I have a studio in Ukraine for like recording, doing segments. It's a bunker studio, actually. It's underground. So if we get bombed, I can keep streaming. Because if I'm in an apartment, I technically, even though I don't usually, I have to stop stream if like the air sirens go. But it happens so often that it makes it like really impractical to stream. So I have this bunker studio in Kiev. But my motivation was in part because I have friends here, and obviously I don't like it when my friends get blown up. That's bad,
Right.
primarily. The other thing that I care about is that I do genuinely believe that
Mhm.
Ukrainians are fighting to preserve not only their own autonomy and their own nation state, but also preserve a democracy that was very hard fought and a lot of progress that they're trying to make on their democracy that was extremely difficult. What happened in 2014 with Euromaidan was a culmination of a ton of outrage of not only of being forced out of the association agreement by basically being strong armed by the Russians, but it was also anger about corruption, anger about income inequality, anger about a lack of opportunity, anger about being removed from this idea of having like visa-free travel with the rest of Europe, which would have given a lot of Ukrainians, young Ukrainians especially, more economic and job opportunity. And that type of autonomy was taken away from them when the Russians strong-armed them. And that's what caused that kind of democratic grassroots reaction that caused Euromaidan. And I do believe that preserving that revolution is a noble goal, even if there's still, of course, flaws in Ukrainian society. The advancements the country is making on corruption is real. The advancements the country are making on democracy is real, with the last few elections being consistently said by election monitors to have been done fairly, and that the exit polling matches what was actually like shown in the official government results. And I think that it's a priority to try to preserve those gains in their country. And so I support, even though the idea of like they're fighting for democracy. I know some people try to say if democracy dies in Ukraine, then American democracy will die. I think that's silly. I it sounds kind of like Vietnam, like domino theory, but I do believe that if Russian occupation does take over the country, then Ukrainian democracy at the very least is guaranteed to die, as we've seen it die in occupied territory. So I believe in their autonomy. I don't want my friends to blow up. The Russians have been particularly brutal in this war, and it is really, really bad. And seeing how bad it is, I want as few people under occupation as
I
possible.
feel like Russians don't really have much of a reputation for being like kind and gentle when they go to war, right? So
Yeah, no, man. The last few wars that we know about, there of course is like the Soviet-Afghan War, which was not just the Russians, but it was also, of course, dominated by the Russians. Very brutal war. The use of butterfly mines, which they're also using here in Ukraine. I don't know if you know what a butterfly mine is, but a butterfly mine are these
No.
tiny little plastic explosives that kind of look like toys. They're plastic, and if you saw it on the side of the road, you would have no clue what it is. And what they do is they put them in these big rockets and they fire them over the position, and they'll drop like 100 of them over an area. And they're not designed to kill you. They're designed to maim you and injure you. So you'll like lose an arm, lose a leg. And so you become a burden and you can no longer like engage in combat. Problem is, since they don't look like mines and they look like plastic in Afghanistan, they were often mistaken for toys. And so children would go up to them, pick them up, blow off their arm. And that is something
yeah, they
that
do look a lot
I
like.
mean, this
I'm
is
looking at
a
some right here. So this
this is a
what you're talking about here.
a problem with a lot of different munitions that are used in war zones. Children are often the most egregious victims of war. And,
Absolutely.
I think it's an interesting kind of jump off to talk about the recent kind of controversy regarding Biden signing off on sending cluster munitions to Ukraine. It's my understanding that cluster munitions have some of the same problems as the butterfly mines that you're talking about. You know, these explosives kind of spread out over a large area and create a de facto minefield, or can create a de facto minefield and make, you know, forested areas and fields unsafe for generations of people.
I've filmed with Ukrainian demining crews for a month. I didn't just film with them. I live with them, if I'm being completely honest. And in that month, I learned a lot of information that has made me unbelievably doomer-pilled. The first piece of information is that 1/3 of the entire country is mined. It is a gigantic piece of territory, and Ukraine is a big country. People don't realize how big it is. Definitely, when we're talking about European standards.
In terms of
Is-
like geographic region, what's like
It's the
comparable?
largest state in Europe, if I'm correct, right?
I mean, if you don't include Russia, I believe so. Yes. So 1/3 of the country's mined, and I believe 5 months ago, I was told by a demining friend of mine, a friend who works in emergency services, SESU, Ukrainian emergency services. He's a deminer. That if the war was to end, and he told me this at the time, so it's only gotten worse. If the war was to end 2 months ago, it would take 70 to 100 years to demine the entire country, because we've got World War I munitions that they've been demining from before the war, World War II munitions that are still throughout the country that they were demining throughout the war, and they would be removing hundreds to thousands of these types of unexploded munitions from World War I and World War II already before the war happened. Then you've got the 8 years of violence in the Donbass from the Russian invasion of Crimea and the backing of the rebels there, and now you've got violence on a scale that Ukraine and Europe hasn't seen since World War II. It is the largest war in Europe since World War II. So demining is going to be an issue that's going to be around.
Well,
in
I
Ukraine
just looked
till I'm dead.
up. I just looked up the size of Ukraine relative to Texas, and it turned out to be a pretty good thing to do because they're very comparable in size. I think Ukraine is very slightly smaller than Texas. So, if you're an American, you can kind of use that as a basis of.
I mean,
comparison.
that's really not good for Americans unless they've driven through Texas.
And then you know.
You don't really know how big Texas is until you drive across
Yeah,
Texas.
because if you got to drive, I've made this drive a million times from Louisiana to California, all along Interstate 10, and most of that drive, and that's across the country.
You feel like you're never going.
Texas.
You feel like you're never going to actually leave Texas.
Imagine a third of Texas just like covered in mines. Because most states, it's like now entering Alabama. And then a couple hours later, it's like now leaving Alabama, now entering whatever. So now it's like, but Texas, it's just like, it's a slog. It's forever. You're there for like a day and a half or some shit. It's crazy.
Traveling across Ukraine also is even worse because you've got these
there's mines and bombs.
Well, yes, there's mines and bombs.
So obviously, yeah.
That's not only that. That's like one part. There was this one time where I kind of accidentally woke up in a minefield. I can talk about that story later. But for me, it's always the checkpoints, because the checkpoints can take 5 minutes, the military checkpoints, or they can take 2.5 hours. And so you're talking about doubling the amount of time it takes to travel from Kiev to Kharkiv if you're going by car, right? So you're saying Texas traveling double how much time it would take usually if you're traveling in Texas. So it's
fucking insane.
It is a slog. And I gotta be honest, I don't know what it is, man. But if it's a man at the checkpoint, it's like 10 times easier every time. If it's not a man at the checkpoint, if it's a woman at the checkpoint, it's usually harder.
That's
and
because you know what that is? That's because a woman is gonna fucking go by the rules, and a man's gonna be like, I trust my gut. You seem fine. Go on through.
This is the thing. It's actually, I don't think you're too far off, because I'm of the belief that before this war, there were a lot less women in the police force, but also a lot less women specifically in the military guarding checkpoints or doing stuff like this, because there just wasn't checkpoints. And so now that they're being allowed in, they already have some sort of societal stigma about, women in the military, exactly what they can do, what they can contribute. If this is kind of like downplaying their contribution. And so a lot of them are really on their game because they don't want to be found to be making mistakes. And definitely, and they're new, so they're trying to go as by the book as possible. And so that means sometimes it means they're kind of like a stick in the mud. I remember once I was traveling back and it was so bad. I got 5 women in a row. And that means that by the time I got to Kiev, they literally wouldn't even let me in. It was too late. We had to sleep outside in a gas station parking lot.
Yeah. Women suck, says Taylor Ray in our chat. Just, women suck. All right, cool. You know, I mean, those women are probably doing the job better, even if they're slowing
absolutely.
them down more. Because, like I said, a lot of these guys are probably just like, yeah, you seem fine. Go.
Yeah, they almost found all my drugs and weapons, man. Like I got to be more careful next time.
Yeah, it's no good.
You got balls saying that in a fucking war zone, dude. I wouldn't even be joking about trafficking drugs and weapons.
Well, like I'm safe because I'm not trafficking drugs and weapons.
Okay.
As supposedly. Yes, not doing it. I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it. I swear to God. I'm sorry to my editor and I'm sorry to my managing editor. I didn't do it.
Oh, whatever. Your guilt is already here, right on tape. It's already there.
Yeah,
this is now the Incel podcast. Whatever, Kirk. Come on, give us a break, all right? Why is Paul so quiet about the Ukrainian Nazis? Well, we're working our way up to shit. Why do you guys want to just go for the jugular right away? Like, what about them Nazis, huh? All right, yeah. It seems like there's a lot of white supremacists in Ukraine. I've seen that. So what's up with that?
I mean, I think it's a combination of two things. I think the first thing is
well, first of all, how bad is would you say it's exaggerated? Would you say, I mean, obviously
it's 100, it's very much exaggerated. I've met probably 2 to like 2.5 Nazis.
Okay.
Because it's hard to know if someone's a Nazi if they don't like have a swastika on their chest sometimes. Like some of these, like the Slavic runes, it's kind of hard to tell because on one hand, you only see certain Slavic runes usually like worn by like weird Nazi freaks, but also you're in a part of the world where like that type of like Slavic and like neo-pagan like culture is actually like a thing, definitely amongst like some of the hippie people that I've hang out in this country, right? So it's a little, but certain runes you see and they're usually only used by white supremacists. I've met 2 to like 3, and I've actually interviewed the people who are part of the militias that the Russians are usually talking about. Right Sector, for example, is one of these militias that are often talked about. I interviewed Right Sector fighters. I interviewed them about their ideology. Most of them, I would say, are kind of like 3%ers. You know, like Proud Boy types, kind of 3%ers. A lot of them like Jordan Peterson. A lot of them like Ben Shapiro quite a lot. Jordan Peterson, I don't know why he's very popular.
I don't know why he's popular right here. Fucking anywhere. So
I mean, yeah, I don't know why he's popular. He's not my cup of tea. But there are Nazis though. They do exist, and there are also Nazis in the military. But the amount that they are talked about does not match the amount that they actually exist out in the field. And over the last 8 years as well, definitely since the war started, so many more Ukrainians have flooded into the armed services that the amount of, I think, radicals in the military has also drastically gone down as they flooded it with more and more and more everyday people who signed up after the 2022 invasion. And even beforehand, it was somewhat exaggerated. They do exist. It's exaggerated the amount they exist. A lot of it's from the 2014 volunteer battalions, which those don't even exist anymore.
Twilight City Steel. I don't think anyone needs Russia bad spoon fed to them. All right. I feel like people understand that.
Well, that is one of the things that I get a lot in my opposition to America's involvement in Ukraine is that I'm simping for Russia or something, which in my mind and in my ideology couldn't be further from the fucking truth. I probably despise Russia just about as much as anybody else does. But that is one of the downsides, I think, to having any kind of discourse about this is that there seems to be a snap judgment made on a person who, you know, may have philosophical opposition to America involving itself in yet another war. That they are just kind of like, oh, you're just a Russian propagandist. You're a pro-Russian guy. I feel like I can simultaneously be against Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine and against America's involvement in that conflict.
Well, yeah, I don't think anybody, just because they oppose aid or oppose American involvement, necessarily means they're in favor of the Russians. Now, there is a question to be like brought about, like, what's the policy prescriptive difference between somebody who is in favor of the Russians as an American, like a pro-Russian American, and somebody who's just against involvement? There's not much of a policy prescriptive.
I don't agree with that. I think that there is a policy. I mean, you can't put me under the umbrella of a pro-Russian guy.
Well, I'm not saying that it's as a policy prescriptive, because if somebody was, for example,
if you were super pro, if you were pro-Russia policy would be like, we're arming Russia.
Right.
Well,
or Russia
we're
justified,
providing material support to Russia.
Right.
And
Russia is justified in
continuing to do
taking
business with Russia in terms of economically and shit. And we're not, slapping them with sanctions or anything like that. Obviously, if we're pro-Russia. So that would be fundamentally different in terms of policy, I think.
Well, I don't think necessarily that's true, because I know a lot of pro-Russian Americans who their main thing isn't saying we need to arm the Russians. It's we need to not arm the Ukrainians. The main purpose, definitely, of the Russians and the spreading of information in the United States, or what they want from American public, and this is part of the reason why they've been upping the amount of English language media they're trying to pump out into this space, is to make Americans not support aid. And so policy
those same people would oppose sanctioning Russia, though.
Yeah, but I also don't know any pro-Russian Americans who are also in favor of sending weapons to Russia. They seem to primarily be focused on stopping weapons.
I mean, they probably just figure Russia has enough weapons to begin with, but they're certainly not going to support sanctions against Russia, which I would say I support the sanctions.
And they don't seem to support.
I also don't really feel like I'd be against
any stripe.
I also don't really feel like I'm against giving aid.
No, I'm very much in favor of giving humanitarian aid.
Right, but weapons seems a little odd.
Why does weapons seem odd?
Because you don't know where those weapons are going to end up. You don't know if let's say you arm Ukraine, Russia wins, Russia takes over, you just armed Russia. Especially when you're talking about sending jets.
I mean, I'll take this a step further. I don't know this for an absolute fact, but I would bet, my salary for a year that Ukrainian people have already been killed.
Take it.
Okay, yeah, I'll bet it to TJ that Ukrainian people have already been killed by weapons that were sent to Ukraine and seized by Russians.
Oh, I mean, that's almost certainly true. But I mean, that's true of any weapon shipment to any country, period, in any war.
Which is weapons. Well, that's one of the reasons why I oppose it.
Well, I don't know. I don't think that's. I think that's a weird reason to oppose it, because for me, my main focus here, definitely after coming here and seeing a lot of this stuff on the ground, is trying to isolate the population from the Russian occupation and trying to isolate the population as much as possible from the worst brutalities of the war. And
Sure.
I believe that the only way that's possible is through upping the ability for the Ukrainians to keep the Russians back from their cities.
Is that the only way possible?
Well, can I give you an example?
Sure.
So I went to Kharkiv, I think it was mid last year, and this was during the end of the Kharkiv counteroffensive. This was a breakthrough that the Ukrainians did. It was the first major counteroffensive, which proved that them pushing back the Russians from Kiev wasn't a fluke, but that the Ukrainians, actually have the ability to push the Russians back. And before, when I first went there, during the end of that counteroffensive, they were bombing the city's electrical infrastructure. We had to take cover into different buildings and destroyed buildings multiple times as they were striking the city's electrical grid, as they were striking the city's civilian infrastructure.
I mean, this is what happens. This is what happens during an invasion, right?
Yeah, they were using artillery en masse to shell the city. And what happened after that counteroffensive had completed is the amount of shelling that Kharkiv saw drastically went down because the Russians were no longer in range. They physically could no longer bomb Kharkiv, and that was the only way Kharkiv found some relative level of peace. And I got back from Kharkiv, I think a month and a half ago. I'm going back to Kharkiv in 2 days. I'm going to be going up there in that area to film with artillery crews. I can't say much more than that, but I'm going to be filming with artillery crews in that area. And the city, it's like a night and day transformation. The amount of people that have come back, I would say like tens of thousands, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60,000 people have come back to the city. It's a lot more vibrant, a lot more economically active, and people feel safer. And that is only possible with the weapons that were provided to the Ukrainians to push back the Russian army. Armored vehicles that are necessary to, be the spearhead to push the Russian army back from these cities. I was in Mykolaiv during the start of the Kherson counteroffensive, and what the city was like before and after the Kherson counteroffensive was successful, stark difference. I was in the city when they were just shelling the city center, peppering it with artillery, killing civilians indiscriminately before the counteroffensive, and then afterwards, they no longer could do it. And so Mykolaiv since then hasn't been shelled. And so that's how I think the element of how weapons contributes to the well-being of Ukrainians is undercut, because it's only with these weapons that you can guarantee concretely that the Russians won't be shelling your cities, or you can push them back ever so slowly from these major population centers.
My kind of problem with your perspective is not that it does, like I agree. You give weapons to people that are in need of them. They're going to use those weapons to defend themselves with it. My problem is not with that. It is with the idea that there isn't a way, because if your biggest goal here, and I don't think yours is, you said preserving democracy was preserving the
one of my goals,
Ukrainian democracy. But if your biggest goal, and I like to think my biggest goal is preserving human life. I'm a border abolitionist. I don't think Ukraine should exist. I don't think Russia should exist. I think at this point in history, humanity desperately needs to link hands and face the fucking grim future together if we're to have a fucking chance. And so what I see is poor working class people and poor working class people killing one another so that oligarchs can benefit on both sides of the issue. And when I look at it from that perspective, would there have not been a better way to preserve life in Ukraine via diplomacy? For example, ceding some territory in eastern Ukraine to Russia, or engaging in real, honest, good faith with regards to diplomacy in Russia, which I don't think happened. I don't think that the United States ever, in good faith, sat across from Russia and tried to find a real hard diplomatic solution to this problem.
So, as for the border, I'm not a border abolitionist. I'm much more, I guess, of a normie on this issue. But whether or not you believe borders should or should not be real, where that line is at the end of this war is going to have a very real effect on how the civilians of that local population live. Recently, the Russian government introduced legislation. It was an executive order by Putin, which made it so that if you don't accept a Russian passport in occupied territory, you can be physically removed from your homes and deported, and then they can take your property and they can give it to Russian settlers. They can remove your ability to have property rights in the communities and towns and cities that you grew up in. There's a decent chance you might be detained. There's also a really decent chance, and people don't talk about this enough, they'll be tortured. And the torture is very, very bad. The reports that I'm getting out of friends who went to Izium, who went to these locations that have been famous for the type of like torture that went on there: electroshock, breaking of knees, breaking of fingers, like genital mutilation, like very, very like disgusting stuff. And so whether or not you personally want borders to be real or not, where that line is drawn is going to be the difference between torture, deportation, losing of property rights.
Torture, deportation, genital mutilation. These are all things that happen in war. It's why I am a principled anti-war leftist.
But they also happen during the quote-unquote peace period. In occupied Crimea, during the peace times, Crimean activists were found dead, bodies bloated down the river. In these communities, they used to be technically Ukrainian territory. They used to have legislative representation, the Crimean community, before the Russian takeover. And
were there not violent incursions by Ukrainian people against people who identified as Russian in the Donbass?
Were there, when you mean, what do you mean by like a violent?
Was there no violence like you're describing?
Oh, there was violence. Of course, there was like street level violence. There have been instances of war crimes on the Ukrainian side as well. That's absolutely true. But when you look at the vast majority of the evidence, on one level, it's because the Russians just have more power. They have a bigger army, they have more soldiers, they have more bombs. So their ability to do war crimes and do atrocities is just astronomically larger than what the Ukrainians have the ability to do. But also, the way that the Russians have engaged when it comes, for example, cluster munitions usage. The New York Times has reported that the Ukrainian military has used cluster munitions in like March and April of like 2022. So this isn't like a new phenomenon that is being introduced by the Biden administration, but
Well,
the
we're
way
just we're sending more.
yeah, we're sending
I
more.
think is that's the
We are sending
contention.
more. But the difference in how the Ukrainian military has used cluster munitions and the Russian military has used cluster munitions is also starkly different. With the amount of cluster munitions usage on the Russian side and heavily populated, dense urban areas where civilians are still heavily present being quite frequent, and them doing that very frequently. In Kharkiv, especially, that was a very big issue because once they failed to take the city, they got really angry, and then they took out all their rage and frustration by just shelling the city day in, day out for months, killing tons of civilians. And so, while it is true that there are war crimes on every side of any war ever, the military culture of the Russian military and the Ukrainian military is still starkly different. Just like the American military had a very different military culture than the Japanese. The American military committed a ton of war crimes during World War II, but it wasn't anywhere close to what the Japanese did because of the military culture and of the propaganda that was propagated about the Chinese and about the Americans and what they were like and why it was okay what they were doing to them. And in Russia right now, if you go in Russian state media, you'll see constant justification of war
I mean,
crimes.
we saw a lot
You'll
of
see constant
dehumanization of
dehumanization.
Japan. Wait, there was a lot of dehumanization of Japanese people, and
There was a lot of
that went into-
dehumanization
I mean,
of
almost
Japanese
the
people.
we-
That is true.
form of
We-
dehumanization
we
of
took-
Japanese people
we
here
put
in the
them
United
in
States.
we put them in internment camps here, for fuck's sake.
That is
Even if-
true. Well,
I mean, so like
my-
there was
my-
definitely a lot of like it's okay to do stuff to the Japanese because they're like subhuman mongrels. Like that
Oh.
messaging was very present
yeah,
in
absolutely.
American wartime propaganda for sure.
That's true. My main point is though that the military cultures were different at the time, and the amount of war crimes and how that was encouraged and how that was protected by the Japanese regime, the culture was different, and that created
Sure.
a higher propensity to do.
But I mean,
these
you're
types of
talking about
atrocities.
two different cultures with two different sets of like values, where what might seem reasonable to one could seem absolutely barbaric to another, and so on and so forth, especially in wartime.
Mhm.
And of course, everyone in wartime also is going to spin how the actions of their side are all these wonderful acts of self-defense, and the actions of the other side are all these horrible, nightmarish things that are so beyond the pale and evil that anyone would condemn them. But the reality is that both sides are probably engaging in a little bit of evil. But my main problem with the arms thing is still just like, you take an explosive situation where two factions are at war with one another, whoever's right, whoever's wrong, you start releasing more and more powerful weapons into that situation. Like, you don't know what the fuck the result of that is going to be. And America's made this mistake before. I mean, we're the arms dealers of the world. And a lot of times the
America
weapons
bad,
that
TJ. America bad.
well, America can be pretty bad sometimes.
I mean, well, that's kind of one of the frustrating things that I've run into in talking about this is that, if you try and point out America's horrible track record of involvement in countries that are at war with one another and factions within those countries that are at war with one another, you get called, an America bad person. And the opposite of that is Russia good in people's minds, and that's as far as their minds go. I mean, you can look here in
the Japanese
our
were
chat.
not undisciplined. That's ridiculous.
Yeah, no, they were the opposite.
They were
there's a lot of
extraordinarily
stupid people in the chat
disciplined.
tonight.
Shut up. That's fucking absurd.
But in the chat, you can see that that narrative already being spun. There are people whose brains just shut down.
I'm glad the chat is having a lively discussion. I don't mind.
Yeah, go for it.
So I do believe the United States has, of course, sent weapons to people we shouldn't have sent weapons to, but we also have sent weapons to people we should have sent weapons to. The Lend-Lease program, I think, was an incredibly effective program. And I'm using the World War II example, but that's normie foreign policy take, right?
Well, sure. I mean,
always
World War II is probably more accessible to most people than.
That's the thing. People complain about using World War II as an example all the time, and
I don't complain. I don't complain about a vivid example that everyone fucking gets quickly. So it's fine with me.
And so I believe that it needs to be a case by case basis when we make decisions like this. I don't think it's as simple as.
I think the nature of our fundamental disagreement, because I don't think it's ever a good idea.
it's never a good idea to send any country weapons.
No, I don't think it is.
So if Vladimir Putin went on TV tomorrow, right,
Okay.
and he said,
All right, hypothetical. Let's go.
yeah, I love hypotheticals for this because I don't think anybody is this starkly like never ever send weapons or always send.
Well, I mean,
never think anybody's.
I think a
polar opposites.
I think a principle is pretty worthless if there's not going to be some kind of exception. But you're gonna have to paint a pretty vivid picture for me to be like, all right, I guess we could do it then. But go ahead.
So if a country, if Vladimir Putin was to go on TV tomorrow and he was to
Mhm.
say the equivalent of like, look, the goal is to make Ukraine not exist. Ukraine isn't real. Ukrainians aren't real. It's all fake. They're a bunch of Nazis. We need to destroy and eradicate the Nazi
Isn't that
menace.
basically not a hypothetical? Isn't that basically Putin's position?
This is Putin's position. Yes, this is a
Okay.
Putin's position. But I'm just throwing this out there.
Sure.
Now he's already said all these things, right? And this has led to an extremely brutal campaign of war and destruction.
Sure.
And my question to you is, how does us sending weapons to Ukraine that they then use to push back this brutal occupation, which I know neither of you support? I'm not going to
Right.
straw man either of you.
I
How does this materially make the situation worse? What's a realistic scenario? Because I want to hear your hypothetical where it becomes worse because we sent these weapons.
The realistic scenario for me where it becomes worse is a scenario that I think is, probably played out a few times before, which is, all sending these weapons does is prolong a war that Ukraine is destined to lose. Ukraine loses the war. Russia seizes the territory, and whatever is left of those weapons end up being Russian weapons.
So
another thing is another
Mhm.
another scenario. Ukraine becomes so destabilized that, and maybe they repel Russia, but there's the infrastructure and everything is so fucked by the time that they're done that there are now warring factions within Ukraine fighting for power,
And
these weapons
this
end
is
up being
another.
used in a gigantic civil war. In
This
a
is
destabilized
an
country.
exactly. This is one of the things that I get shit for when I bring it up. I'm not trying to claim that the political situation is the same, but I think that there are a lot of comparisons to be drawn in Afghanistan. We're talking about America trying to push back, trying to assert its hegemony over the earth and push back against what it perceives as communist hegemony, right?
Mhm.
You support, one of my favorite examples to cite when I'm talking about this is it Rambo First Blood Part 2?
Wait,
I think
it's
it's
First Blood.
the Mujahideen thing, yeah.
First
Yeah,
Blood.
yeah. Where Rambo goes to
2,
Afghanistan
Rambo
to fight the
2,
Russians.
First Blood. Rambo First Blood Part 2.
Part 2. I think that's it. I
The
think I was right.
The name and scheme of those movies is so fucked.
But if you look at that, it's a really interesting time capsule because at that point in America, the media narrative was, here are these poor, oppressed people, and by supporting them with military engagements and weapons deliveries and training for their fighters, we're enabling these people to fight for their freedom and their autonomy.
Mhm.
What ended up happening in Afghanistan was, as soon as they were successful in pushing the Russians out, and a huge linchpin in the dissolution of the Soviet Republic in general, after that happened, the country factionalized, and these very self-same weapons were used to oppress the people of those countries as warlords and factions squabbled over power. And then you see the narrative shift super starkly in the early 2000s with 9/11, and now these people are evil, they're scum, they're literally doing violence on their own populations with American weapons, using American training. And these are the bad guys. And now American soldiers are invading Afghanistan, getting killed by American weapons that were put there. I think this bolsters TJ's point of dumping a bunch of fucking weapons in the middle of a really destabilized, war-torn region has far-reaching consequences that oftentimes are hard to judge.
Yeah, and really hard to predict.
So, as for the idea of the Russians getting the weapons, I don't think there's really scenario where they could end up with the majority of these weapons unless they were to make Ukraine as a state itself submit and totally capitulate. Because the Ukrainians, no matter what, are going to have to preserve the weapons because they need their weapons because this if this war doesn't finish this issue, as in the Russians are not kicked out, there's a decent chance that the war is going to kick up again in 5 to 10 years, right? And that's another point I always want to.
There's a decent chance that this war is still raging on in 5 to 10 years.
A 10-year. I don't. At the current pace of violence,
in the era of forever war. Either, so. In the nobody thought that the Afghanistan war would last fucking close to 30 years.
The war. Okay. What? There's so much I want to respond to.
Okay, go ahead.
So as for this war, when we talk about the war in Iraq, the war lasted 28 days, and then you had a very long occupation, right?
To me, there's no distinction.
You got to let me finish my point. Okay. So the war was for 28 days, and then there was a long occupation. Now that was still a war in a way, a war against Al Qaeda, different resistance groups, a bunch of different things. But the Russians haven't gotten past the first part. They haven't gotten past the invasion. In fact, they haven't gotten even that fairly deep into the invasion, as in taking the capital, taking over all the government hotspots. They don't even have air superiority, right? So the scenario in my mind of the Russians completely making the Ukrainians capitulate, that idea was smashed a month into the war. So I don't see how those weapons are going to transfer from the Ukrainian government over to the Russian government if the Ukrainian government has every incentive in the world to stop them from happening. Stuff gets captured in battle.
It's not an intentional thing, right? But you said earlier, you conceded that Ukrainian people have already been killed by weapons that were given to Ukrainians.
Well, yes, like I was about to say, you can overtake a position and find a rifle given to them by the United States and then use that against the Ukrainians. But the vast majority of this firepower is being used by the Ukrainians, like 98 to 99% of it is used by the Ukrainians to push back against the Russians and capture Russian equipment. The number one tank supplier of Ukraine right now is the Russian military. Poland, I think, is number 2 with like 600 tanks or something like that. It is the most overwhelmingly, it is the Ukrainians capturing Russian equipment and the Russians abandoning Russian equipment. That seems to be the standard right now. There have been instances of it happening the other way, but I don't think that there is enough of American equipment being captured in the field for it to make a demonstrable difference in Russia's ability to destroy Ukraine. Definitely not enough to overbalance the amount of aid that the weapons is giving the Ukrainians in defense against the Russians. If that wasn't the case, they wouldn't be asking for the weapons. And if it wasn't the case, we probably wouldn't have seen so much success in the battlefield by the Ukrainians from using these Western-backed munitions, which they used to take back the rest of the Kharkiv Oblast, which they used to take back Kherson, and which they're currently trying to use to take back Zaporozhye and the rest of the Kherson Oblast through this current counteroffensive. And they might even use to take back Bakhmut. So who knows exactly what they're going to take. I'm not going to promise that they're going to win the war, but my main point
is Russia might retake one of those previous, you know what I mean? Like I do not agree that it's out of the realm of possibility that 10 years on this conflict could still be going.
Not at
that's
the
just lived experience.
Not in the way that it's currently going. It might become a frozen conflict, but when we talk about the rate of death and destruction, I don't see the Russians and the Ukrainians being able to sustain this for 10 years. I mean, there's a possibility where maybe backed by a very stubborn West, continuing to support the Ukrainians, they could support it financially and maybe with munitions. But the Russians, I mean, they've burnt through a very significant portion of their tank stockpile in a year and a half. I think like 30 to like 35% of it already. And so I don't see how they keep that up for another 9 years. They don't have the production capacity. They don't have the foreign exports. So I just don't think it's like financially even feasible. The Russian government has seen its, I think, energy profits and government revenues drop by about 50%. They've increased military spending by 200 to 300%. So I understand like the idea makes sense, but it's just not. I don't think it's financially or physically feasible with just the materials that both sides have for it to last that long.
Don't they have? I mean, it's my understanding that Russia is operating on a very capitalistic fiat type of currency. Why don't they just do what we do when we're $1 trillion plus in the ruble and just
the ruble is sadly not
money.
that strong. They've introduced a lot of like price controls of the ruble, and that actually led to the ruble being on paper very strong like a month to 2 months into the war, where they were talking about like record strength. But recently, a lot of these artificial controls have started to break down. A lot of investors are trying their best to pull their money out, but the Russian government has literally banned people from taking their money out of the ruble. They're doing everything they can to protect it, and it's still losing value. I think it hits a really bad point recently with the Wagner coup, with it I think going up to like dropping to like a 95, like really like 95 in comparison to like the USD. Really really bad condition for the ruble right now.
I think that your political calculations are probably mostly correct on this. I feel like most of what you've said is cogent and makes perfect sense. But I also think that in war, these sorts of predictions have a tendency of not working out,
blowing up in
because a lot of
people's
people, a lot of times, like people sit there and, oh yeah, well, you know, the geopolitical situation on the ground is this, and they're not going to be able to sustain this war effort for this amount of time. We're going to do this and that. But there's so many X factors. There's so many black swans. There's so many things that could happen that no one fucking sees coming. So many surprises that it's impossible to like just predict what the larger result makes. So this is true of anything in life, right? You throw a rock into the pond, there's ripples. And like, you don't necessarily know what those ripples are going to do, where they're going to go. And I think that before you take any action, especially an action as provocative as throwing a bunch of weapons on a geopolitical conflict, you might want to really be fucking careful about that. Like intensely careful.
This is one of my main critiques of the Biden administration, and that's probably different than one of your guys' critiques of the Biden administration, is he's been too slow in weapons deliveries. And that the way the war has gone is that for the first month or two, the entire government was basically in a state of, is the government going to collapse? Is it not going to collapse? Are they going to hold it up? But once they did, they ever slowly like changed the position, where at the start of the war, it was like, we're not going to send this, and this, because they didn't think it was a possibility for the Ukrainians to do as well as they did. They kind of shocked the world. Nobody expected Ukrainians to do.
I'm going to tell you a position that I don't think Paul would agree with, but I think maybe you'd agree with. I don't know. I'll run it by you.
Okay.
But you know, very early on in this conflict, I was like, look, if America's going to get involved in this, I don't believe in this half measure shit. If we're going to get involved in this, I think we needed to just fucking get in Ukraine and be like, hey, Russia, if you fucking set one foot in here, it's World War III, bitch. I mean,
I thought I was going to agree with you, then I don't agree with you.
No, because no one does, because I'm very extreme with shit. Like, if we're going to go, we're going to fucking go.
This is what I was talking about. You're either like 100% or 0. I think there's a balance that can be found.
Fuck balance. Balance is a goddamn...
I definitely...
Balance is a delusion of the human mind, in my opinion. People are always like, oh, yeah, see, look, we figured it all out. No, you haven't. It's do or die.
I think that the American government being able to find a scenario where they can supply the Ukrainian government largely based upon stockpiles that we're not even using of equipment that like
absolutes are dumb isn't absolute, fucking dipshit Jeffrey Epstein. Get out of here. That is a fucking absolute, bitch. Self-defeating.
I think the amount of support that Americans have for aid to Ukraine would go down if American soldiers were on the ground dying in Ukraine. After the war in Iraq and after the war in Afghanistan,
well, here's the thing.
Americans were not...
Sorry, I don't mean... Go ahead.
Americans are just... my point is, Americans are not super eager to send their boys overseas again to get killed. And so that's why Americans are still... a plurality or a majority of them still support aid, because they can support Ukraine while not having to get their...
There's still boys being killed.
If we're going to talk about political calculation, though... Hey, look, is Russia going to cross that line if we did that, though? Is Russia really going to be like, yeah, World War III, it's on?
It's
0% fucking chance. 0% chance. No fucking way.
I don't think that's the case. I don't
0% chance. Even they're not that fucking
I don't
crazy.
think that's the case either. And that's another point in my opposition for this, is I think that this is brinksmanship. I think that we're talking about the two largest nuclear powers in the world engaging in proxy warfare against one another. And
so, before I address it, can I address the Civil War thing earlier? I never got to
sure, go ahead.
Civil War thing. So the Civil War thing, I would have understand maybe more of a concern in like 2014 when they had the volunteer battalions. Are you familiar with the volunteer battalions?
Well, look, I want to say that like my thing about the Civil War, I'm not that's not a critique of any specific political situation going on in Ukraine. I don't feel qualified to even put that forth. I'm just saying that generally speaking, if you destabilize a country, divisions that already existed within that country are going to boil over. And, you know,
And
Ukraine
Euromaidan
obviously-
showed us that those divisions exist in Ukraine.
Ukraine
So-
is a deeply fucking, you know, divided country when this conflict starts. Obviously, they've banded together to a great degree to fight this war. But, you know, if this war goes on and conditions get, you know, to be more intolerable to the point where people are starving and miserable and all this stuff, you know, countrywide, then, you know, that could definitely bring out some, you know, internal turmoil, some resentment that could boil off into civil war, even if Russia is ultimately at the end of the day repelled.
So I think there's some distinctions when we compare Afghanistan, for example, and the situation that happened with supporting the Mujahideen, and when we talk about Ukraine. And I think that makes it kind of hard to compare.
Ukrainians
these two
are white, so come on.
Exactly. Okay. So yeah, that was my third point, but I'll skip that point then. So my first point is Afghanistan, by its geography encourages decentralization. Though it's not a very geographically united country, and its mountains, and it's not super interconnected infrastructure, and it kind of encourages it makes it very easy for you to like start a resistance movement or for you to oppose the central government. This is part of the reason why the Taliban up until very recently never had control of the whole country, even before our invasion, because the Northern Alliance had control of the mountainous north of the country, because again, Afghanistan's geography does not encourage like a strong centralized government. It was the same problem we ran into during the occupation, is that Afghanistan, due to its geography, is very difficult to go out and fight the rebels. It's very difficult for a central government to properly tax and do like, proper censuses. And so I think Afghanistan is unique in its ability to not be a super strong central authority and to fight and kill, and it's not special how they kill each other, but their geography encourages decentralization, which could also encourage civil war. When we talk about Ukraine, that same geography does not exist. That's the first point. But also, as TJ mentioned, the country has become much more united now. And the authority in the country is much more centralized than it was in 2014 during Euromaidan.
My worry is not about Ukraine like factionalizing in the midst of this war. Of course, Ukraine is united, much more united now than it was pre-invasion. Invasions have a tendency of clarifying that sort of thing. What I'm worried about is what happens when tempers cool? Things work out however they work out. Russia annexes the Donbass and pulls back for another 10 years till they go for another scoop, or Ukraine pushes Russia out. What's going to happen?
Well,
with
the
these
plan,
billions and billions and billions of dollars of American weapons that now exist in this country that has old and very real and deep political divisions?
well, I would say that none of the political divisions that I have seen while present, maybe that'll change in the future, makes me believe that they're anywhere close to that, or that it would lead to like a shooting conflict between Ukrainians. Obviously, I can't see into the future, but what would happen to these weapons most likely is that they would continue to be held by the Ukrainian armed forces in case the Russians ever invade again. They'd probably continue to train on them, and we'd probably continue to integrate them more on Western weapon systems. But here's something to consider, though. One of Ukraine's goals is to join the EU and to join NATO. And from even the most right-wing, like ultra-nationalist people I've met in this country, they all agree that that should be the ultimate goal once this is all over, to join the European Union and to join NATO. It is very hard for me to think of Ukraine joining NATO and the European Union, having this clear path towards economic prosperity and strong security, and them choosing civil war, or the rest of Europe standing by and the rest of the NATO alliance standing by as the Ukrainian state descends into civil war. I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm just saying that I don't think any of the odds are in the favor of a civil war starting. Maybe if it was more decentralized, like it was in 2014, 2015, with their volunteer corps and stuff like that.
That's not that long ago. You don't think that decentralization as a result of war could come raging back?
Well, I mean, the volunteer battalions don't exist. They've all been integrated.
Well, see, here's what, like, as I understand it, here's what happens when a country factionalizes. Okay, it has one united armed forces, and then chunks of those armed forces are appropriated by opposite sides of a political disagreement, and they become opposing armed forces.
Mm-hmm.
That's the worry. The
But
worry
what-
is not
but
a
what
united.
type of force, what type of political force in Ukraine has the type of independence and influence in the military that they could say, we disregard the official central command, we disregard the central government, we're going to break off and do that. That political force, that militia, whatever that would be, that doesn't exist. The
it's
closest
not about,
that ever
it usually isn't
the
we
closest-
disregard central command. It's that we claim that we are the central command. Like, it's not like, oh yeah, we're not going to do what they tell us. No, we're telling them what to do because we are the right and just rulers of the country.
I have yet, the closest I can think of to the scenario playing out was probably with the volunteer battalions, and none of them ever could have made that claim or got close to making them claim. And all those groups were like 5,000 people, right? 5,000 people with guns. Now, as much as 5,000 people with guns is, 5,000 people with guns, they can kill people. That can't take over a whole country, and certainly a country with a military the size of almost 1 million people now, backed also by the entirety of NATO's arsenal and militaries as well. Even if this was to happen, which I think is not likely, this would probably happen if NATO is correct in what they're saying about Ukraine becoming a NATO member state while they're in NATO. And if that happens, there will be a direct military intervention. And then that would be smashed almost immediately.
Sorry, hold on, I want to read this comment here. The reason Paul's opposed is due to a scenario he's invented. He said, no one's inventing a scenario.
I actually think in fairness,
possibilities here. So.
In fairness, we're all inventing scenarios here. The opposite scenario to the one that I've been presenting, and to a great extent TJ's been presenting, is the same as any scenario that Dylan has provided as to what he thinks is going to be the outcome of this war. So if you want to be fair, your position on this is an invented fucking scenario that you came up with in your fucking head too.
Well, of course we can't predict the future, so they're all invented.
I'm not trying to say anything that I'm saying will happen. The whole point of what I'm saying is that there's a tremendous amount of uncertainty here.
Well, I mean, anything's possible though, right? Like, if something's tremendously unlikely, like you're not going to make bets based on what's tremendously unlikely.
We're talking about possibility and probability here.
Right. And they're two different things. I'm not even comfortable assigning,
but not everything is probable. I think just looking at the fucking history of the 20th and 21st century, that it is probable on some level. It may not be fucking 50% or 75%, but I think it is probable that there will be factionalization in Ukraine, in a post-war Ukraine, whatever shape that takes.
Like political factionalization, but that happens in all states.
Right. Well, that's how it starts, though. These things don't just spring up out of nothing. It's political divisions.
That's democracy. That's democracy.
Right, but we're not talking about a fully fucking established place. You yourself just said that there was this type of fucking unrest in 2015.
Right, and I mean, like,
yes.
It's a minute ago.
But
and
also,
another thing is, like, even
the situation is very different than 2014. And even then, by the way, let me just say, even then, it wasn't. I don't think it was really that possible, because we're talking about 5,000 people trying to take over the entire country, and how that wasn't going to happen. Not to mention the volunteer battalion's entire mandate was based upon pushing out the Russians. So if they then turned their guns on the Ukrainians, all their support would evaporate.
What about here's
an example. Something like this. Something like this actually happened. Something like this actually happened. Right sector's leadership at one point tried to turn against Petro Poroshenko, and not militarily, but saying like, maybe we won't listen to Central Command. And then they lost like 40 to 50% of like their base's support. They drastically reduced the amount of influence they had in the country. They were criticized by every aisle of the political aisle. They backed down, and right sector's image hasn't really been the same since. And so the people who have even tempted to sniff anything that could be close to it, they immediately get disregarded.
Because the national esprit de corps is, we all have to fucking work together right now against Russia. When that goes away, and these factions are sitting on the possibility of commandeering a fucking arsenal that they never could have dreamed of having pre-US involvement in this, I think there might be a different tune being whistled.
I think that part of the problem here in this discussion is that I think that because Dylan has this large, obviously impressive compendium of knowledge about Ukraine specifically, And we're
He's got
talking more. I think
first-hand knowledge, which
right.
is something that you don't get even
Obviously.
on most news programs.
Sure.
You're not
But-
getting pundits that have spent actual time in
But
Ukraine.
I'm not approaching this from a specific standpoint of Ukraine because I don't even think I would be qualified. But I am approaching it from a standpoint of humanity and just looking at human history and how human beings operate. And I feel like from that perspective, it's once again like you just don't know how this is all going to shake out. You don't know who's going to win this conflict. You don't know what territory is going to be preserved or ceded. You don't know what the geopolitical situations are going to, the political situations in each of these countries is going to be by the time this is all said and done. You don't know what the standing of Zelensky and Putin is. You don't know who might be vying for leadership if they see if Putin's perceived as weak. So now Russians, within the country, that's already been happening.
Look at what else is teetering
maybe-
on the edge, TJ. This fucking nuclear plant that they've got, the largest nuclear plant in Europe.
Right, that's true.
Is a chess piece in this, and both sides are claiming that the other side is planning to fucking bomb the place and basically spread nuclear material over miles.
I really hope that doesn't happen. I really hope neither.
I really hope doesn't happen.
I mean, I could keep talking about it. I guess the main difference for me is just like I don't think this is a particularly likely scenario, and I believe when we make like American foreign policy decisions, we need to try to make them based on what is tremendously likely, what would be not only beneficial to the United States, but would probably be beneficial for global security, global stability.
I mean, we have to assess risk too, right?
And I do think we do need to assess risk, but I think the assessment for risk is tremendously low that they all turn their guns on each other once the war ends.
I mean, that's just one scenario of many, right? So I mean, like you asked me to lay out some, I laid out two, but
yeah, I know. I understand your.
I mean, I'm just saying, like,
when I asked about like what's the realistic scenario about what happens with these weapons that they cause more harm, and all the scenarios that I usually proposed are either tremendously unlikely and not really based in what's happening on the ground, but based upon the facts that human beings have the physical ability to do it, right? Like after the war could end and they all become Marxist, Leninist, communists, and then worship Stalin. That's possible, right?
Yeah,
it's just tremendously unlikely, especially if you know the history of Ukraine, right?
I think that's far more. I think that's.
I think
way
you're
less likely, but yeah,
you're assuming a lot of foresight here that I don't think you can have. I mean, one of the I wanted to get off on this fucking, and I think it's connected to what we're talking about here. One of the reasons why I don't support military intervention or arming Ukraine is because of my lived experience of being a United States citizen and seeing what's happened just in my lifetime. And the time just barely preceded. I was born in 1980. So there's been a lot of American war making and war facilitating in that period of time. And I look at the places where America has interceded, and I think about being an average person in one of those places. Has my life significantly increased in value to myself when it comes to just my human needs being met, my safety and security, my ability to be, mobile in society? Has there been a whole lot of positivity wrought by American interventionism? The answer is no. It would have been looked at as extraordinarily unlikely that almost 30 years on, Afghanistan would still be under the Taliban. There would have been a person, maybe even an expert just such as yourself, saying how that could never happen. The Taliban has been fractured by this. They're fighting one another. You know what I mean? They can't even agree on this, that, or the other. If you would have said 15, 20 years ago, Afghanistan will, in the relatively near future, be back in the hands of the Taliban, one of the most oppressive regimes on the planet, there would have been somebody like you who said, is it possible? Sure. I mean, a dragon fucking appearing out of the sky is possible.
Yeah.
But is it probable? I mean, no. And I heard,
So-
I know this for a fact because I heard it. I lived through the era of media manipulation surrounding that conflict as an adult. I was 21 years old on 9/11. I was your age, basically, when 9/11 happened. And I lived through the expectations of the punditry and the expectations of the military experts who told us, oh, this is going to be over in a month. It's already over now. Mission accomplished. That's unthinkable. It's unthinkable that there could be a fucking insurrection in Iraq that would go on for a decade. They will greet us as liberators there. It's unthinkable. And the unthinkable has happened. And now here we are, different year, different area of the world, same geopolitical opponents, same techniques. And I'm wondering, how do we factor in the possibility and probability of this being a net negative, not just for fucking Ukrainian people, but for Europe?
It's apples to oranges, both round, sweet fruits. Pretty
Yeah, both fruits.
pretty
Get
comparable.
outta here, kid.
Fucking bullshit. Fucking dumbass
my-
bullshit analogy, dude.
It is true that the unlikely scenario can still happen. It is possible that any unlikely scenario happens.
I mean,
But
how do we
if you
know
look-
what's likely
if
and
you look-
unlikely, though?
You
How
can
do we
look
really
at
know
the,
that?
You can look at the history of the nation. You can look at what the current
The
situation
history
is.
of the
current
nation is it was
politics. You can look-
extremely divided just a few years ago.
It was extremely divided because of what? Because the Russians put pressure on the Ukrainian government.
I mean, those pressures aren't going to go away. New pressures are going to form. I mean, like
if the Russian
as
government
surely
can
as
no
they were
longer
brought together, they can be rendered asunder, right? So,
if the Russian government can no longer invade Ukraine because it has NATO protection, as is what it seems to be what the NATO summit in Vilnius, even if they haven't decided on a when, they have decided on if, right? They've decided that it will be a part of NATO. Whether they stick to that, I don't know if they will, but let's say for a moment that they do. And if they do stick to NATO membership, that stops a Russian invasion. That stops the same pressures that they applied in 2014 that caused much of the violence, that forced Yanukovych at the time to back off of the association agreement, go off of the promises that he made to his people, and back off of that deal. Those same pressures don't exist, which caused the violence that happened then. The Russians can't invade Ukraine if they're part of NATO. If there's one thing that we know about NATO, and there's a lot of things you can say about NATO, is that once you join NATO, the Russians don't invade you. And so that violence wouldn't be possible if they have that type of defensive structure in place, that type of violence that started in 2014.
Right. That's the imperialistic reason for existence behind NATO, right? It's projecting American power into Europe so that we can say if Europe sets foot in Poland, they've basically fucking stormed the beaches of fucking Corpus Christi, Texas or some shit.
If Europe steps foot in Poland? I'm sorry.
If Russia steps foot in Poland.
Oh, yeah. No, yeah.
It's basically like they fucking invaded Florida. When it comes to our response,
it's Article 5. The idea from Article 5
Right.
is that if you attack one NATO nation state, you've attacked them all, and it's been incredibly successful in bringing stability to the vast majority of Europe, who don't attack each other. And the one NATO state that is the one states that are being attacked in Europe are the ones that aren't in NATO.
You don't hold on, wait a minute now, Pete. I want you to honestly tell me that you don't think that the establishment of NATO and America's fucking position of ultimate power in NATO is not imperialism. It might be imperialism that you agree with. It might be imperialism that you think is slightly less evil than the other imperialism. But you can't credibly look me in the face and tell me that the United States directly projecting its military power in opposition to another state into Europe isn't imperialism. I really want to hear what you fucking think it is.
I do think, though, when we use the word imperialism, right? I think there is an action, like a negative assumption assumed. If we were to say America sends weapon to this country, that's bad because it's imperialism. It's bad when America projects military power or economic power in that way anywhere. But if a nation state is asking for it in a defensive war, I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. If we decided we were going to invade Cuba tomorrow and we're like, we're going to make Cuba the 51st state and we're going to bring baseball back to America and get all those baseball, they fucking love baseball in Cuba.
They do, yeah.
bring back all we're gonna kidnap all the great baseballers and bring back baseball. If we were to do that, it would be perfectly fine for the Russians or the Chinese or for anyone to send the Cubans the guns necessary to defend against an American invasion. I would think that would be moral because the Cuban people don't want to be part of the United States. I think that part has been made particularly clear over the last 80 years. And
Sure.
so I think that even if it might be considered imperialism for Russia or China or whatever power that sends Cuba those weapons in that way, you could consider it that. I think using the same word for that and the same word for like annexing the Congo and like, you know, colonialist like oppression.
Well, I think that's colonialism versus imperialism. Imperialism,
colonialism and imperialism are hand in hand. Like colonialism is a part of imperialism.
They go hand in hand, but they are not the same thing.
Well, colonialism is a type of imperialism, yes?
Sure.
So then see how having the same word for the rape of the Congo and sending a defensive nation weapons.
Have we fucking devolved into semantics? Oh shit.
I don't mean to devolve into semantics, but when we say
I hate when debates do this. Okay.
Me too.
I just want to be clear that there is a distinction here that I think should be noted, and having just one word, just imperialism, kind of like blurs the lines here.
Yeah, does it? I don't know. Maybe.
Yeah, I don't know if it does either, but
I mean,
it's a matter of conjecture, I guess.
I don't want to get into semantics because it's just useless.
I really do hate it too. I'm not opposed to having it out.
What technically qualifies as imperialism, and it doesn't matter.
Ultimately, here's what I'm saying. I do not trust the intentions of the United States when it comes to this. And there are a lot of people, when I say this, and I think it's actually a good argument. I don't necessarily agree that it diffuses mine in any way, but people will say, oh, well, you know, just because it's being manipulated by the United States and its military industrial complex and its, you know, corporate fucking oligarchy doesn't necessarily mean it's bad.
Both
and
sides, bro.
Who's being manipulated? Like Ukraine's being manipulated, or that we're being
absolutely
manipulated?
the Ukraine will be in hock to the United States for a fucking 100 years.
Yeah, I mean that's
off
actually
the back of this.
The best case scenario for them is kind of like America's dick is in their ass forever. Like we're gonna break off our dick in their ass. That's the best case scenario. It's like basically like, you don't want to be Russia's bitch? You better come over here and suck my dick then.
Yeah, our corporate contacts are going to fucking slowly but surely worm their way into your natural resources. Our corporate contacts are going to slowly but surely worm their way into your banking structure and just make it a subsidiary of America. That to me is not good.
I mean, it's not good, but I've had this conversation with Ukrainians before, and I asked them like, what do you think of America's intentions here? And most of them will say, I don't think they're pure, or I don't think they're entirely pure, right? And I'm more sympathetic to the last one, that I do think that there is.
What did I say? Good. Oh, do you break out? He
got
bombed.
Yeah, I don't know.
Oh, hello?
He's dead.
Am I back?
You had a little lag spike there. We were worried for your safety, but you're fine. Okay.
Okay. What was I saying?
I don't know.
Fuck. I completely lost my train of thought.
I fucking hate that. I'm sorry that happened. I'm a very like free flowing person, and when lag or some shit interrupts me midstream, it can fucking kill a whole.
Okay, I think I got it.
Okay.
So there is a very big difference to the Ukrainians that I've talked to in what the relationship Russia wants with Ukraine and the relationship that the United States wants with Ukraine. Right?
Sure.
There is no Ukrainian and American imperialist saying, what Ukraine? There's no Ukraine. Your language isn't real. Your people aren't real. Yes, we have the rights to all of your resources, and it will literally just become an American state. Yes, we have your right to your territory, and those bases will become our encampments because we want them to, because that's our historical lands, and we can have it, and your people aren't real. In fact, not only are your people aren't real, but you're all Nazis, and therefore anything we do to you is basically okay because you're a bunch of Nazis who want to kill us all.
Russia bad.
On the other end,
Russia's intentions are bad.
On the other end, America's like, hey, we might make a pretty penny here. We might.
Well,
have
what
a
is
good...
that? Okay, that's reductive.
Wait.
What
That's
does
not
that
reductive.
mean?
That's not. Wait, you didn't let me
No,
finish.
that's very
You didn't let me-
reductive.
you know-
That is
wait.
oh, that's
That
a
is-
sweet one there.
That's by the way, that's 100% true, by the way. That even if you were to go to the most aggressive capitalist, like America's going to buy out the resources and they're going to literally kick off all the local Ukrainian workers
Wow.
and they're going to only employ Americans eating big fat burgers on every oil rig
That
in
wouldn't
Ukraine.
that they
You
don't want
run-
that though.
you
That's a
put that
ridiculous
scenario.
scenario. They want Ukrainians to just be good little worker bees in American corporate
Well,
structure.
Either way, you've run those scenarios by Ukrainians. They're going to pick the later scenario every single time.
They're not
even
going
if
to get a
wait,
they don't have a choice anymore.
you asked them.
They
and
are
this
in
is what they'll
hock to
tell you.
us for the rest
You
of their
asked them.
fucking
You
lives.
asked
They're going to
them.
give.
How
They're
much?
gonna give it.
How much
We're gonna
does
take it.
Ukrainians' perspectives matter on this issue when it comes to which alliance structure?
Well, let me
or
just,
what
I don't
what
know if
group-
Ukrainians look. Maybe they disagree.
Ukrainians.
Sorry, I don't know if Ukrainians look. Maybe they disagree with me, but I don't know if they've really experienced the red, white, and blue up the ass yet.
Well, listen.
They've
okay?
they've experienced, I think, the Russian
I think
tricolor
the-
up the ass,
I think
and
the
the difference
Ukrainians,
between that is we aren't going to kidnap their children.
Yeah,
I
the
think
Ukrainians
I think that
need
that
to-
is a distinct difference that they make good note of. By the
listen,
way, I'm not saying that we should rape their resources. I'm saying we shouldn't do that. But even in the worst scenario of what we could do to that country, it isn't 1/3 of what the Russians are doing to it currently.
well, listen, just I'll tell you a little parable, all right? Everyone just
Okay.
be patient for a second.
I like
I'll
fairy
get-
tales.
Look through my little fairy tale. So there's a little bird. He's flying south for the winter, but he flew a little too late. A little too late. It's already too cold, and the little bird freezes in the sky and he falls.
Oh, poor little bird.
Right. And so then he's frozen, he's on the ground, he's near death, and a cow comes and shits on him. Right?
That's warm.
But
though.
the shit is warm. And so the bird thaws out and he's saved. And then a cat comes and digs the bird out of the shit and eats him. And the moral of the story is that not everyone who shits on you is necessarily your enemy, and not everyone who gets you out of shit is necessarily your friend. And I think the Ukrainian people should probably take that to heart.
In fact, I know that they should.
Because
I've seen.
America's here to get you out of shit. But
This
it
is
might
not-
just be to eat you.
I really take exception to your like, oh, we're just going to make a few bucks over there. I mean, que sera, sera. You know what happens in countries that are economically dominated by America, right?
Okay, what's going to happen? And let's just compare it to what the other option for Ukrainians. Like any scenario you lay out, it's not going to be worse than what they're currently experiencing at the hands of Russian occupation.
So it's lesser of two evils again.
I mean, a lot of the world is like that. There's never going to be any like perfect American-Ukrainian relationship. And also,
Not
that's
with that
like,
attitude.
let's be clear. We're talking about the worst possible scenario of America's relationship with Ukraine, us raping
what
their
about-
resources.
What about the best
just-
possible scenario with Russia where fucking, Putin has a change of heart? He's like, you know what? Ukraine fought valiantly. I respect them as a people. And just decides to be I mean, it's every bit as far-fetched as America's going to be a nice guy once we
that's
have you.
not it's I don't think it is as far-fetched as the idea of America
man.
respecting Ukrainian
It's
militant
always
rights.
the hair
I don't-
splitting on this shit, isn't it?
I do think I don't think this is hair splitting to make note of the fact that the worst scenario that
Oh.
we could possibly follow down with our relationship with Ukraine is not any worse in any way than the best scenario that's currently going on with the Russians or could go on with the
Let me
Russians.
consult my crystal ball. Ooh.
I mean, we could. It's not a crystal ball. We can look at the history of it. The Russians have
Oh,
been pushing
but
forward this war for
history-
8 years. 8
Black
years, and we
Swan
have
events, though, my friend. I mean,
we have
like, come
tried.
on.
We
You can't. History
we're
is
much more-
history is a good little barometer, but like shit could fucking play out in ways that you couldn't even imagine, right? So you don't know. None of us knows.
I mean, so okay, it feels like the analysis boils down to the world's complicated. We can't know anything, so
Right.
it is what it is. So we can't send anyone weapons ever.
No, I mean, well, yeah, I think that's pretty fair, actually. I don't think we should send weapons. And I'm not
Don't you-
saying, like, look, you can't
don't you-
use the uncertainty
is
of the world to become a coward that doesn't want to do anything at any point. And like
That's
I
what it
said,
kind of sounds like though.
well, remember, I'm the same guy that said we should have just fucking been like World War III, bitch. So,
Do you really think that?
yes. I really think we should have fucking drawn a hard line at the fucking beginning and
So it's
saved
either-
everyone a lot of fucking headache.
So it's either threaten to blow up, create a scenario that could legitimately possibly blow up the world, or
I mean, we're already in a
basically do
scenario that
nothing.
could blow up the fucking world. I mean, like, come on. Russia decides, like, man, you know what? fuck America, fuck them. It's time for open conflict. It's time to fucking kick off World War III because we're pissed that we can't win this fucking war.
I mean, we're already
I don't
blowing up
think
the
that's-
world with our fucking rape of the natural resources of every fucking country that we can get our fucking sticky paws on.
I don't
Like,
think
that's already blowing up the fucking world. We're already facing a migration crisis unlike anything you're ever gonna fucking see.
Uh-oh. It's delving
don't-
into climate change territory.
I don't know if if I would compare the migrant crisis to nuclear war. I do think there's
That's going to be one of the outcroppings of nuclear war as people flee the cities. There's going to be a huge migration crisis.
well, I'm
Well,
sure
not
if
only
there
that,
were,
but
well,
just because
if,
of all the
if any of us
climate
survive,
refugees as
yes,
well.
but I think there's a distinct difference here. But we can get to nukes. We've kind of beating around the bush on nukes for a bit now. When it comes to nuclear weapons in this war, I don't think the risk of nuclear weapons usage has really moved much since the start of the war, as in a traditional nuclear weapon, the use of a tactical nuclear weapon, or like a on a tactical scale on Ukraine, or an intercontinental ballistic nuclear weapon on like an international scale. I think all the motivations seem to be pushing Putin against doing this type of thing, but that doesn't mean I want to create scenarios where it's even a possibility.
I wanted to just say for a second, I don't agree with this comment. I don't think that Dylan has nothing but neoliberal apologetics. I think that Dylan is pretty bright and seems to understand this situation pretty well. But
Definitely
I think
from a political perspective, better than
right.
we do.
Oh yeah, 100%. Like he's obviously more knowledgeable, blatantly so. But like the thing is, I just think that he hasn't been around the block enough times. I'm gonna play the experience card, be like, he's just young and naive. He doesn't know how badly this is gonna get fucked up, and in 10 years he'll be apologizing.
Well, he won't.
Okay.
No, because that
Maybe
never
he will.
happens.
You know what? He seems like a class act. I think he will, Paul.
Well, maybe he will, but yeah, he'll definitely be the exception that proves the rule on that
So
one. Because
as for the neolib apologetics, I concentrate on Ukraine. This is my issue. But if you were to go down the list on like union issues, labor rights, whether it be like any number of like political issues, you can call me a neoliberal if you want to. But I think I am genuinely more left wing than probably the majority of the American like Democratic Party, or what is considered the American left. I don't know how much that matters online, because online it's like all radicals, and it's all like the more radical you are, the more attention you can get. But I would not consider myself a neoliberal. As for the idea that I don't have enough experience on this, it is true that I am not old.
What
And
did
you
I
are
say?
old,
The
right?
most
That is
pathetic comment I
true.
ever heard from TJ. Oh man, give me a break.
I don't have enough.
Oh, the playing the age card. Okay, gotcha. Sorry.
I don't. I'm too young, and and maybe if I was a little older, I'd understand. I'd say that your age has made you cynical. I would
Maybe.
say that as you've gotten into the old age of
Agree.
192, and you've seen all these wars and
Mhm.
death and cynical destruction, you've made the determination that I've seen America do so many bad things on the international stage. The
Mhm.
idea of America doing a good thing on the international stage, especially when it comes to the military use of American power, that
Mhm.
just seems impossible to me, because you've lived through Afghanistan, Iraq, and so many negative American military interventions that did not end as intended, that it's hard for you to want to make a commitment like that in the future.
I don't
That's
just-
what I assume.
I don't dispute a single thing you just fucking said. I think that's 100% correct. I think it's a valid position though. I don't think that that it's wrong.
I think it depends upon cherry picking. I think it depends upon, you lived at a certain period of time, you saw a certain portion of American history, and that portion of American history is going to affect your perspective, because that's your lived experience. Even though as times change and new conflicts come, the perspective and experiences you experience could not assist you there. Afghanistan and Ukraine, as much as they were both wars, the wars are very different, the motivations are very different, the people and players are very different. So I think that as much as that experience might be useful in, determining policy towards Afghanistan, determining policy towards Iraq, different players, different countries, different factors
Same
involved.
game.
You could,
Med
but
just gave us $5. I'm sorry, Dylan. I want to answer this.
Mhm.
Why do you guys? I want to quickly answer this. I'll let you get right back to it. They want to know why me and Paul dismiss anything that boils down to lesser of two evils.
Well, I'll answer
the-
for myself. I won't put words in TJ's mouth.
I have a
It's
very
because-
quick answer that I want to just give, and you can give
Well,
yours
okay,
too. But
sure.
Mine,
I mean,
mine
mine's
is
pretty
basically
quick
that
too.
when you're brain is constantly in the mindset of choosing the lesser of two evils, you become blinded to actual good. So that would be my problem with it.
Right. I would just say that at my core, despite being labeled a doomer, I'm an idealist. I think that humanity is capable of coming together in an unprecedented way that might stave off our eventual self-inflicted extinction, at least for long enough for us to maybe get off this planet and explore the fucking cosmos together as brothers and sisters. But I don't think it's probable that it's going to head that way. And a lot of the reason why I don't think it's probable is I see an entire generation of young people like Dylan who are being sold the same bill of sale that I was sold when I was Dylan's age. Where, look, America's fucked up. But do you know that Saddam Hussein has literal rape rooms? He has literal fucking rape dungeons. So these people are going to be way better off if we just go over there, drop some munitions on their fucking freedom fighters, okay, the brave freedom fighters, and make it a military outpost of America.
I think you got your wars mixed up. We dropped weapons to the Afghanis, the Afghans. I mean, we're doing the same. We did the same thing in Iraq, my friend. Where did we give guns to?
The Iraqi military that was being trained by American soldiers throughout the entire occupation of Iraq.
Oh, okay. I thought you were talking about to fight Saddam. We dropped guns to rebels. Afterwards, yes, we did. The Iraqi military.
No, we did. We did that as well. We supplied munitions to counter factions in Iraq, like Shiite militias in Iraq
during the Iraq invasion.
Yes.
Which Shiite militias?
I don't remember the names of the Shia militias.
Okay.
Sorry.
So I'm sorry. I never heard about us doing like any combined arms operations with like Shia militias or anything during the Iraq invasion. I'm just unfamiliar with it. But I was also three.
The Shia militias eventually became what we dubbed the Iraqi army, and we're given weapons and training. That's my point. That's what we're doing in Ukraine. Yes, we're delivering weapons and we're providing military personnel strictly for training purposes to teach Ukrainian people how to use those weapons and how to fight with our tactics, right?
Teaching Paul be back in America in 1776 and be whining about how they were receiving weapons from Imperial France to fight the British. I mean, maybe. Who fucking knows? Maybe history would have turned out better. You don't fucking know, bitch.
Can we also like acknowledge that the situations we're talking about like are vastly different, because we're also talking about deposing regimes, creating power vacuums, and then filling the power vacuums ourselves. We did that in Afghanistan and we did that in Iraq. In Ukraine, there isn't a power vacuum. In fact, Zelensky, if anything, proved there wasn't a power vacuum by staying in the country when many people expected him to flee. Many people expected his government to collapse, and it performed much better in wartime than he honestly did during peacetime.
I agree that the situation is different and the players are different, but the game is the same.
Well, war is the game, but the games have different rules in different countries because there's different conditions, a different standard.
I do want to really quickly. I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. I think like we're going in circles at this point, though. I don't know if you guys agree, but I feel like it's kind of like gone over the same kind of place a few times now. We've done a few laps around this track. I just want to remind everybody of our goals tonight. You guys have already made the first two pretty easily, and we're pretty goddamn close to the third one as well. So for 150, we got Public Freakouts Cat Edition. It's going to be Public Freakouts, but everything's related to some kind of cat. For 300, we have a quiz where we're going to try to discern the difference between fake headlines and real ones. Of course, in this ridiculous fucking time, that's going to be pretty hard. For 450, we have some right-wing memes and right-wing posts that we're going to look at and just ask the question, is the right all right? I don't know. I don't think they are.
I think the answer is no, but hey, maybe they'll change my mind.
Uh,
For 600, we're going to do Let's Watch Christian and Anti-Atheist YouTube Shorts. Mostly going to be one guy we're going to be looking at, but we have a few little appetizers before we get to the main course on that one. For 750, we're going to take a look at Cornel West run for president, see what we think about that, see if he could earn our vote, ask, is he just a spoiler? Does he have any sort of fucking chance in hell? Those kind of questions. And then for 900, We're gonna watch Ben Shapiro shred a pro-choice argument, a new pro-choice argument in his mind. I don't think it's actually all that new, but I guess it's the first time he's heard it because he describes it as new in the video. I don't know what we're gonna do for sloppy seconds tonight. And I did want to announce that we have figured out what our July gauntlet is going to be. We're going to be doing the paranormal gauntlet. It's going to be 6 hours of us looking at, the evidence for ghosts.
Did you hear that ghost?
Was that a ghost?
That
ghosts and UFOs and skinwalkers, whatever the fuck.
It's a
whatever
rave
kind of
ghost.
Whatever kind of paranormal shit we can fucking find. Anyway.
There is one aspect of this that I wanted to get into.
Go ahead, Paul.
I didn't want to interrupt the flow, and I don't want to take us back.
Sure.
Mhm.
But I'm not going to go back and find it, but there was just a comment saying TJ and Paul's ageism is really showing right now.
I kind of
want to establish this shit because
I was not playing the age card. I mean, Paul, you opened this.
I'm not going to play the age card, but I do think that lived experience is important in the development of one's kind of worldview and expectations for an event.
Sure.
And I do think that a lot of people, maybe not Dylan, and I don't really think, look, it happened to me. I didn't always have, at Dylan's age, when I was Dylan's age, I didn't have the same politics that I have now. I was a much more standard, dyed-in-the-wool kind of Democrat, pro-American voter guy back when I was 21, 22 years old. And it was through years and years of being outright lied to by my government about their intentions in these various different countries and the quote unquote freedom fighters that live in them that eventually become terrorist scumbags that we're going to smoke out of their holes. It is through decades of lived experience that my position is what it is now. And I do think that creates a gap between Dylan and I. Dylan, look, you can academically study. You might know more about the particulars of the Iraqi invasion than I do. I never studied it like, a job.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a difference between academically studying something and living through it.
Yeah, I mean, I do acknowledge, I was not alive during the invasion of the liberation of Kuwait. I wasn't alive during Yugoslavia. I wasn't alive during Iraq. Well, no, I was alive during Iraq. It was just I was watching Little Bill. I was a big Little Bill fan, which I can't rewatch now because, Bill Cosby, terrible.
Damn.
But
you can't separate art from artist on that one.
I can. I was just I just like to make fun of Bill Cosby.
I still love Bill Cosby's stand up and his work, despite the fact that he's a scumfuck.
There has to be a line though, because I feel like if somebody
my
does
line is now I won't go see a Bill Cosby concert and put money in his pocket.
Yeah, I will not go and go help Bill Cosby actively now. I do think there has to be a line though. It's to some degree because TJ disappeared.
He'll be back.
If I look at somebody's art and all I can think about is their crime or like the bad thing that they did, then I can't watch it anymore, right? Like
Sure.
that type of stuff is pretty bad. And with Bill Cosby and Little Bill, it's like that because all I can think about when I hear his voice is like that same voice being like talking to those women in that way.
Get you a drink or whatever,
Exactly. Yeah, that's all I can think about.
Have another Jack and Coke. Yeah, no, I get what you're saying. I just I don't know. I think seeing so many of my icons fall over my life has led me to have to really have a pretty good ability to set aside what a scumfuck somebody is and just kind of enjoy the art a little bit. I mean, to me, like Bill Cosby was raping his way through the 80s and he made what I consider to be the best stand-up special ever. One of the first to really get super popular. Bill Cosby's himself is just an unimpeachable fucking masterwork of stand-up. You very rarely find a better example of a comedian that holds an entire audience in the palm of his hand like Bill could. And I think that honestly, that was part of his darkness. I think he used that kind of charisma in a very dark way to perpetrate the crimes that he did. So I can definitely see, your point of having a trouble with it, but I have to set it aside.
I couldn't do it like it was. If I found out Norm Macdonald was a serial killer, I would probably just not care. Like there are a few
Sure.
people that I could. Like,
in fact, I wouldn't even
liked.
I wouldn't even be surprised if Norm turned out to
Norm
be a serial
Norm
killer.
Macdonald was a serial killer.
he kind of gives me the vibe, so I wouldn't even be shocked.
He'd be a pretty funny captor, though, wouldn't he? I feel like he'd be
Yeah.
telling jokes the whole time.
That is one thing that we can maybe talk a little bit about while TJ's gone.
Yeah. One last thing though, because my
Sure.
audience
No, go ahead. Go ahead. Yeah.
is going to yell at me for this, and I do want to make sure I say it. I do acknowledge you have experience, as in you've lived through more geopolitical conflicts than me, but my experience with this particular geopolitical conflict, I think is very deep compared to the average person.
Absolutely.
And by coming here and speaking to people on the ground, seeing the response on the ground, documenting stuff, I've become more supportive of Ukraine as I've gotten more experience. And the more time I'm here, and to an extent that is emotional, but it's also because certain ideas that I had about what the country was like were smashed when I got here, and the type of values that people had. For example, the Russian speakers. I don't know if you've heard this before, but the Russian speakers of the Donbass, the Russian speakers of Zaporozhye and Kherson, they're being oppressed by the Ukrainian government because of the evil language laws. And I've even heard some people claim that you can't speak Russian in Ukraine. But then I go to the first time I ever went to the forward operating position in Zaporozhye. That was a crazy trip too, because I got chased by a Russian drone during that trip.
Oh,
which,
God.
well, what happened?
How do you know? Can I ask you about that? How do you know you're being chased by a drone?
So what happened was we were going to the forward operating position. So that is the literal front line, as in you are facing the Russians. That is the position we were going to. We were going to go there to film and check the conditions. And when we were like 2 miles from there, we get a call, which basically says that, hey, don't come. We're getting shelled right now. And we could hear the shelling. So we pulled off on the side of the road. And we're in Zaporozhye, so it's a lot of wide open fields. So to our left, big wide open field, and to our right, a bunch of trees, no buildings for like miles, right?
Yeah, just endless forest.
Just endless forests and fields. It's like it's kind of like the Midwest, right? It's a lot of sections of the Midwest.
Gotcha.
And I hear this, like, I think 30 minutes in, as I was just kind of like documenting people and like recording them and stuff, I hear like a weird, like kind of like buzzing sound, almost like a small swarm of bees, or maybe like your phone vibrating. And I turned to my friend Patrick Hillsman, who's done a lot of great work in Syria, who's going to be coming back soon, and I'm so excited to party with him when I get to meet him again. I turned to him and I say, "Do you hear that?" And he says, "No." And so I think I'm going crazy. I'm like, whatever. And then like 5 seconds later, somebody yells drone. Either they spotted it in the sky, maybe they heard the sound as well. And immediately we all beeline into the forest, and we get down quick because we didn't know if it was a drone with had a munition tied to it. I don't know if you've seen those videos where they drop the grenades on people.
Yes. Yeah.
Those things are really scary. And you got nowhere to run in this area too, because you're in wide open fields and a drone that's faster than you carrying an explosive munition. There's only so much you can do.
Right.
It could be a suicide drone, or it could be a drone spotting. It could be an artillery spotting drone, as in it was trying to spot us to call in artillery. That actually is what it was. It was a drone spotting. It was an artillery spotting drone. So we're in the forest, we're hiding, and eventually someone makes the call like, I don't want to wait here for the artillery to all kill us, so we're going to make a beeline for the van, which was the van we were using to transport ourselves. And let me be clear, it was a piece of shit.
It's just a van. It was
just a van. It was a van painted green. It was something that somebody would take their kids to soccer practice in, and it was painted green. Therefore, it's camouflaged. A lot of the vehicles here are like that. This is part of the reason why the Ukrainian government yells so much for armored vehicles, is because they don't want soccer mom vans to be the tip of the spear and any counteroffensive. And so we get in the van and we're driving away, and we pull off on the side of the road like 3 miles down because they want to take cover for a bit more and kind of regather their surroundings. And my friend Patrick Hillsman is adamant that at that point, the previous position we were at was shelled, that he could hear it being shelled. I didn't go back and check, but that's something he's adamant in. That's his claim, not mine. I don't know for sure because I didn't go back and check. At that point, we know we have to get out of the area. But they're kind of scared to make a run for it because the more we're out in the open, when there's a drone in the area, it might spot us. We didn't know if we lost it or not, but they make the determination that they got to make a run for it because the longer they wait, the more likely it is that they'll spot us. They'll give the coordinates to the artillery guns, and then they'll kill us. And so we drop back into the soccer mom van. They put the key in the ignition. The thing stalls. So we're trapped in the forest. There's a drone in the area. Van won't move. And they're trying to get this thing started, and it just will not start. Eventually,
I'm sorry to interrupt. Were you with any kind of military?
Yes, I was with Territorial Defense Force.
And they didn't have any like anti-drone options.
They had AKs. They could shoot it, maybe. They could shoot at the drone. They could shoot in the general direction of the drone, but they didn't have any anti-drone weapons. No, any anti-drone guns or stuff like that. That stuff is you can actually buy those things at the store. It's very strange, but they are quite expensive. At that point, the van eventually, after I think like 4 minutes of trying, starts up. We drive away. We go to like SPG-9 anti-armor practice afterwards. But that
had to be hairy. That had to be a hairy 4 minutes sitting in the van, knowing that there's a drone with a bomb possibly on it in the area, and like listening to that engine try and turn over.
I preferred being outside of vehicles than inside vehicles in scenarios like that. And
I've never been in anything even approaching that, but I would too. I would rather be out in the forest with some leaves on me or something, you know.
Every video you see of this war is of vehicles exploding because they were hit by artillery, hit by drones, hit by anti-armor. Like you're a bigger target and you're all condensed together. And this van doesn't provide any cover, like zero cover. It's a soccer mom van. You can take a Glock to the thing, and
it's just going to turn into shrapnel. It's going to work against you if it's hit by any kind of significant munition.
Yeah, so I felt more comfortable outside of the van for that reason, but also I could distract myself when I was outside of the van. I could like lay down so I'm doing something, or I could, be on my phone like messaging or doing something to distract myself from what was going on. Where when you're in the van, you're just kind of like sitting there and you're just kind of just with your thoughts, and that's really bad. I don't like being with my thoughts in scenarios like that. I like being aware of what's going on generally and being able to respond, but I don't like to think about it too much. Definitely during, because then you can like work yourself up into a panic.
That's a trauma for sure. I feel for you. Having gone through nothing wartime based, but I'm the victim of a violent crime. When I was 16, I was taken at gunpoint and kidnapped and carjacked and taken in the backseat of my car out into a field and made to strip naked and run out into the field. And the worst part of that memory to me was the quiet ride in the car with my head down and a gun to it, having nothing but my thoughts, So I can definitely empathize with that. And I hope you're okay, going forward. It's got to be nerve-wracking.
It's one of many experiences. The most recent experiences, I was with rescue workers in Kherson as they were trying to evacuate. And I know this sounds almost comical because of how like cartoonishly evil it is, but they were trying to go rescue cats and dogs that were drowning because of the flooding, because the environmental minister said that over 20,000 animals could have drowned due to the flooding in Kherson, and the ecological damage is immense. They wanted to help humans, but also this was Four Paws. They were an organization focused on animals. Okay. And so I was filming the rescue efforts, and while they were engaged in rescue operations, they got shelled by the Russian army. We got shelled by the Russians when they were trying to engage in that type of operation.
That is one of the reasons why I maintain, not to interrupt you, why I maintain just a principled anti-war stance, because that type of shit happens in war. The most barbaric, soulless shit happens in war. It is stuff that you can't even fucking imagine. Stuff that's more evil than bombing an unarmed organization trying to save pets from ecological devastation. Like, it gets worse than that.
It does get worse than that. And I think most people are anti-war in principle, as in like war is bad, of course. But for many of those locals definitely those volunteers, they had experienced Russian occupation. And Kherson, the city I was staying in, those locals had been there, there when the Russians had occupied them. And something that really pissed me off was constantly hearing the stories about family members who just disappeared one day, and you've never seen them since. You haven't heard from them since. This lack of like knowledge and closure. They're kids that have been kidnapped from the area and are in Russian boarding schools, separated from their parents with no contact. A lot of orphanages were literally robbed of children when the Russians were withdrawing, trying to grab as many kids as possible, which of course is a war crime. And so for them, like, they hate the war, but they had experienced Russian occupation, and the idea of ever returning to that is so unbelievably terrifying for them.
Can I just express really quickly how fucking unconscionably stupid this comment is? You know what? This is the saltiest I've gotten in the entire fucking debate. An anti-war stance only matters if there's a war happening, dumb fuck. When there isn't a war, it's just a matter of maintenance. Like you're saying that opposition to an ongoing war doesn't
Also,
matter, and you should just jump on board and pick a side.
In America, it'd be
being-
pretty hard
that's
to
not
be anti-war at all because there's always a war going on here.
Yeah. When's I can almost guarantee you've never lived a day of your life when America wasn't at war. Dylan hasn't.
Nope.
So come on, buddy. Like, fuck me, man.
But yeah, that Kherson stuff was really crazy because they released the video of them shelling us with the rescue workers on Telegram the day afterwards, and then they put rock music over it and a little like SS symbol in the top left-hand corner. It was a rune heavily used by the SS, and they were a private military company headed by the Crimean Occupation Authority, owned by the head of the Crimean Occupation Authority. And that shocked me and actually kind of unsettled me more than actually being shelled by them, because they committed the war crime of shelling rescue workers and trying to kill them. And they injured a friend of mine, John Jones, an elderly British expat. The shrapnel entered his upper leg and entered his lower abdomen. The only thing that saved him was his pelvis. Ended up deflecting. I guess he drank his fucking milk or something. Ended up deflecting the shrapnel.
So this is why you'd never find me in a fucking war zone. I wouldn't do that.
And they released that video, like bragging about it, saying that we were soldiers about to establish a bridgehead on the other side of the river. That we were gonna, I was the spearhead of the Ukrainian counteroffensive. Apparently, we were the recon teams. But what shocked me more was they're just like, here's our video of us committing a war crime. We're bragging about it. Here it is. And here's rock music over it. Like it's a fucking music video. And I think the song was it was titled like God of War or something. It was almost LARPy.
I fucking hate the internet, man. If we just go back and uninvent the internet, I think we'd be fucking way better off. Oh my God. That sort of thing being made into a meme is a fresh hell. You know what I mean? This is like...
I think about that all the time. There's a lot of people who really don't like me because I'm supportive of Ukraine, and I'm 100% positive that if I die and there's ever a picture of my corpse, that thing will be plastered everywhere all the time, and people will drag me through the mud. I'll be like fucking I'll have the online version of what happened to Gaddafi. That's what's gonna happen.
It'll be like fucked around, found out.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
Good. All the more motivation not to die, right?
Exactly. I must live. Me too. I must live out of spite.
Yeah, I want my fucking power keeps going out here because it's fucking storming outside.
Oh, that sucks.
But yeah, so I missed some of the war story shit.
I mean, it's actually been fine without you prattling on, TJ.
Yeah, I'm sure it has been. I'm sure
your incessant prattling, TJ, was dragging the show down.
Sorry about that. I apologize.
Yeah, no. I reject I really don't like the lesser of two evils. Somebody in the chat was talking about being confused about our lesser. I really don't think that. I think that calling this a lesser of two evils is reductive because it ignores any number of other possible scenarios and kind of boils down to like, well, the only thing we can do is either support Ukraine or not.
Curious to know how you guys feel. We're going to talk about the writer's strike for sure. I don't know if we're going to cover as much news as normal because of this conversation, but we will cover it.
I hope I'm not. I'm hoping I'm not dragging your show down. Like you want to go to cover news, and
I think that people probably like the change of pace.
Yeah, no. I mean, this is
we don't normally have guests. We don't normally have guests on, so it's like a little bit novel.
I myself am enjoying the back and forth as it stands, but I'm happy to move on, Dylan. If you're ready, you want to take a little break.
I can tell stories to talk about this all day. I mean, this is literally my life. I'm like covered in these experiences. I want to make sure TJ gets at least a war story, right? Before he cuts out his power again.
For sure. Yeah.
I'm trying to think.
What's your best one? Is the drone one your best one?
The drone is probably one of my best ones, but I can tell you one that freaked me out because I didn't even know about it till afterwards. I almost died, but I didn't know about it till months later. So I had this experience where I was with these two Polish aid workers by the name of Pavel and Philip. Now they're interesting people, as in they're very like party type guys. They're very one of them's like a very kind of like laid back, kind of like stonerish skater bro, surfer bro, like mushroom tattoos on his leg. You get the idea, right? But they're aid workers and they're good people. I love both of them. They're great guys, but sometimes they can be a little distant. And on one of these occasions, it was me, my friend Patrick Hillsman, Pavel, and Philip, and we were driving back. I forget exactly which deployment this was. This might have been this probably would have been back from Zaporozhye the first time. And on the way back, apparently, while I was asleep and everyone else was asleep, Pavel parked us in one of the largest minefields in the area without knowing it. He didn't check on the side of the road. He just parked us in there. And the only reason he found out was hours later when he woke up and he looked around, he saw like the mine death skulls everywhere, like death, you will die if you step here. And it completely surrounded the van. And so without waking us up, he pulls out and drives out of there very carefully and continues the journey once finding that out. And I didn't know about it until a year later.
Wow, that's fucked up. That almost makes it worse finding out a year.
It is.
Later.
It did make it worse. I was shook because my other friend who wasn't even there told me, and I was like, "Wait, how do you know this and I don't? I was there. I could have blown up. How do you know?"
It could have put you in the loop on that one a little sooner than a year. That's pretty fucked.
I don't know. I kind of feel like I wouldn't want to know. You know,
that reminds me of
if we just go far, either sleep through it and wake up on the other side, or like, you know,
that reminds me very much of a war story. And by the way, this story, very formative in my kind of like anti-war position. My uncle is a Vietnam vet, and he was, as they say in the movies, in the shit, moving through the jungle with his platoon. You know, under constant attack from VC militants, and absolutely had this is the most pants shitting shit that I've ever heard. And it's not even a gory war story like yours, you know, the happy ending, but still dark as fuck. Yeah. This is kind of the same way. My uncle drew Night Watch, and it was they set up a bunch of mortars that for those of you that don't know, mortars explode outward in a cone. Set up a bunch of mortars around their position, and he was the guy basically sitting there with the little red button in his hand. And if the VC charged out of the jungle, it was his job to hit those mortars at the right time and take out as many as possible, push them back. So he sat up all night, dark as fuck, because it's out in the middle of the jungle and they're trying not to give their position away, so it's all lights out and shit. He's sitting in his little central position, you know, from a high vantage point, waits all night. And because he was on duty, his last duty before they went to march out was to go and recollect the mortars. And he found that during the night, VC troops had snuck out of the forest into the clearing and turned all of the mortars around so that they were facing inward at the camp. So if he had hit that button, he would have killed himself and everybody in his fucking platoon.
People say you're talking about claymores, Paul, but
Claymore, sorry. I'm not a big fucking gun guy.
We're not really.
I'm not a big war guy. Yeah,
big war guy.
But yeah, Claymore Mine is the actual name for what I was meant to be talking about.
Yeah, I'm big in the war community. Yeah,
you're a big. Yeah, you're big war.
I mean,
I'm big war. Yeah. I remember getting a lot of reports about the Ukrainians. They would capture like a walkie-talkie, and since many of these guys speak Russian, they'll be like, "Help! Help! We're being attacked. This position's been overrun," and they'll give positions of places that have not been overrun but still have Russians in them, and then they'll go and they'll shell the position and kill a bunch of Russians unknowingly.
Yeah.
I like the stories about war that concern like weird psychological tactics that like
I can
when-
tell you a psychedelic story from this country.
Oh yeah, do that.
Okay, so I was told that this is true. Now, the story is too fantastical for me to just take.
No,
it
I
for value.
100% believe it, even before hearing it.
Okay, so TJ's mom. No, okay. So there was.
It's definitely true though.
A battalion of Ukrainian soldiers like got surrounded by the Russians somewhere in the country. I don't know where. The story didn't tell me. The person didn't tell me. And they were behind enemy lines. They didn't know what to do, and the only way out was through a minefield, right?
Mhm.
Directly through a minefield. I don't know if it was anti-tank, but I would assume anti-personnel, right? And so they were very concerned because they all knew if they walked through this minefield, there was a decent chance one of them sets off a mine, gets themselves killed, gets themselves injured. Nobody wants to lose a leg. Nobody wants to die. So somebody gets the brilliant idea to like, hey, how about I take these shrooms that I've been saving up for the entirety of this war, and I've been having them in my backpack, and I'm going to pass them out, and we're going to eat the shrooms, and then we're going to walk through the minefield, and the shrooms told them where to step, and then they all survived.
I believe it. I believe it, dude. And here's why. If I'm gonna have to walk through a fucking minefield, I would way rather be on shrooms, dude. I'm telling you, man, shrooms add detail and clarity that you don't see ever as a human being, ever. One of my favorite things to do on shrooms, I'm a big psychedelic guy. One of my favorite things to do is just to sit in my backyard or wherever I can in nature and just look at a tree. Because a tree, and it's not like a lot of people imagine like it's warping. I mean, if you take enough mushrooms, then yeah, it will be. But I like to take just enough to where the edges of my perception are sharpened. You will never see a tree the same until you've looked at it on shrooms, man.
I've tried shrooms once. I actually I hope none of my family sees this. I'm more of an LSD guy. I love acid, man.
Oh, dude, tell me if I have been acid dry for years, and I'm very sad about it. I would love some acid.
I'm not a big I'm very big on like knowing what goes into my body, and acid is one of those drugs that I feel like is something that I can consume safely and something that I have fun with consuming and I enjoy. And it's also relatively pretty cheap. It's not an expensive drug habit if you keep it under control. You can, and it has, it has like a cool down timer too, because if you can't trip day after day after day, which I think
you can,
but it's not recommended, and it diminishes the experience. You get a diminishing return if you keep taking acid day after day after day. You're not going to get the same effect.
True.
I've already told this story before, but I think you guys would probably appreciate it more. Now came back and I was in a state that, of course, where acid was legal, because I would never commit a crime. And I just got back from Ukraine for the first time. And I was like, okay, Thanksgiving's coming up. I have this big family thing, but afterwards I got all this acid and I want to take it and I want to trip out. It's going to be great. And so I take it, but I took it unsupervised. I took 6 tabs and I did it in the middle of the night, after coming back from Ukraine. With experiences like I had with the drone. Okay,
yeah,
so
that's a recipe for disastrous trip.
It wasn't,
right there, my friend.
It was not the smartest decision. I'm gonna be completely honest with you. It was an excessive amount of tabs, but my dumbass had this logic of like, oh, I took like 4 tabs last time, and that wasn't enough, so I'm just gonna take like 6 tabs, not realizing that's still like a gigantic jump. And
that's an order of magnitude heavier trip for sure. Yeah.
And so that night, I had the biggest trip of my life, all the consciousness of the world all combined to one. But most importantly, I ended the war by bringing the world together. The Russians decided, this is dumb, and they all left. And then Ukraine was free.
I know that this is being told in a tongue-in-cheek way.
Yeah,
but another thing that has profoundly affected my worldview is exactly what you're describing. Psychedelic experiences are some of the most important experiences I feel I've ever had as a person. I do believe that it changes your awareness in a way that allows your brain to think outside of cynicism and actually think like we could end this today if we all just locked hands as brothers and sisters on this fucking woe-begotten ball of rock, because we're all from the same fucking star stuff anyway. It really opens your mind to that kind of thinking, and I think it's important. I think a lot of problems could be solved if we had world leaders get together, you know, like the G7 or whatever the fuck it is now, and just drop acid together in a nice dark room with comfy chairs, you know, some candles, maybe take a little walk outside in the garden. I genuinely believe that if that happened, that unlikely scenario happened, fucking inroads would be found. Brotherhood would start to take hold, you know?
It was always acid. That was the solution the whole time.
I saw this recent study, or there's an article on a study about the effects that like Molly had on one of the Unite the Right, like really hardcore white nationalist.
Oh yeah, I read that
protesters.
story too. Yeah,
It was very strange. Like it was an interesting story to have him be so transformed in such a major way, where he's telling the study makers, thank you, I know what I have to do, and he just completely turned. He's no longer racist. He's completely dropped it. It was super cool. But also, I do know that amongst the esoteric, like weird pagan Nazi community, they're also pretty into drugs too, and psychedelics, and they kind of twist like psychedelics and Nazism and like all these types of things and kind of mash them together. So
Sure.
I do think that it can help people come together, but I also don't think it's a cure-all. Like I think it depends on the person who's using it. Like if I gave acid to the Taliban leaders, I don't think by them taking it, by the end of it, they're gonna be like, man, let the titty show, man. Let the titty show. I don't think that's what's going to happen, you know?
I mean, I think it could happen, but it would take repeated trips to let the titty show, you know?
Gotcha.
But no, you're very suggestible under the influence of a lot of psychedelics. Acid, I find, is particularly a suggestible drug. The vibe of other people.
well, that's why
radiates into your own trip.
Charles Manson used acid to.
Well, that's
as one
why-
of his brainwashing tactics.
That's
on
why
the
2
family.
of the 3 acid trips that I've had with TJ were ruined by TJ fucking with me. Well, it wasn't you the first time. It was Ben the first time fucked with me.
Yeah.
And then I remember, dude, one of my fucking worst acid memories is you getting me to sit in front of a TV and watch skaters break their ankles and like, you know, like the ouch compilations or whatever. Yeah.
Why would you do that?
You put me off the fucking deep end with that one, my friend. That one was fucked. But yeah, if you're with a bunch of Nazis and you're all Sieg Heiling and you drop acid, you're gonna be esoterically Sieg Heiling. You know what I mean? The idea is to get that Nazi, get whoever the leader of them Nazis is, and put him in the room with the Taliban and with the corporate overlord and with the cucked British prime minister, and have them all drop fucking ass and have a beautiful mishmash trip.
I'm just scared that if we get like Putin to take acid, we're like, okay, so he's gonna leave Ukraine, and the next day he comes on TV, he's like in full battle armor, like he's on horseback. He's like, I have learned of the Mongol roots of the Russian people, and we must go engage in a great crusade. And it's just like complete 180. He's got like Alexander Dugin, like the Eurasianist behind him. I feel like I feel like it'll just turn it up to 180. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Maybe, I don't know. I find
It's worth
that
a shot. I don't know.
Yeah, it's worth a yeah. If we're
we haven't tried it yet, you know.
Yeah,
we've tried fucking a lot of this other stuff we've talked about. You know,
give it a shot, man.
We haven't tried this once yet.
I think we could have some different sessions too. I don't think it all has to be LSD. You know, I think we have a weed session.
I'm convinced you got to fucking show them. You got to show them Wizard of Oz synced to.
I tried that. I don't. That's bullshit. I'm sorry.
No,
dude.
You got to do it on acid though. You got to do it on acid.
I had the most profound acid experience of my life watching Dark Side of the Rainbow.
But okay, like
when
listening
the
to the album alone.
fucking came out, bro. When the Munchkins came out, Dylan, you don't understand. I could see on their little faces radiating the pride that they had as they danced their jigs. And I realized that's me. I am that little person, and he is me. And we're all fucking dancing in Munchkin Land down the yellow brick road. We're happy because the witch has been fucking killed, man.
Look, that's beautiful. That was not the experience I had. I got bored very quickly and then clicked off, and then I just watched cartoons.
You gotta try it on acid, Dylan.
I've tried. I think I tried it on low amount of DMT, but I actually enjoyed, and this is something that I got to be careful with. I enjoyed watching like a tiny bit of very soft horror, a very very soft amount, like a very like low shelf, not super scary horror. I remember I ended up watching like a horror comedy specifically, and it had it, and I liked that variety and the experiences it was heightening, because I had never been that gripped before, even though I was watching like TV Y7 version of horror, because I was on acid. Like everything was so scary. But
Dude.
since it was a low level of horror, it was
Man,
perfect.
yeah, you and I, we could have ourselves a good polar opposites trip, me and you, Dylan. I'm telling you, all the fucking shit that we were fucking arguing about earlier, we'd set that shit aside and travel the fucking cosmos together, brother.
Travel the cosmos.
Yeah,
Hey, maybe. Yeah, that's not a terrible
because I would sooner slam my fucking balls in a car door than watch a horror film when I'm on acid, bro. That just
Dude,
shows you, dude, how
you know,
different people are.
I'll tell you what. Are you guys familiar with the Phil Tippett movie Mad God?
Yes.
Okay. Well, Dylan doesn't know it, but Phil Tippett's
I've
like
only
where's it
seen
from?
some of it.
he's like
It's-
Phil,
that's
Phil
the- that's
Tippett
the
is like
movie
this
that it
old
took-
school special effects guy that
It
used
took him
to
like fucking 20 years to make,
30
right?
years.
Oh, Jesus, yeah.
It took him 30 years to I mean, he wasn't constantly working on it, but he's this old school special effects guy that made this really fucked up, dark, horrible nightmare scape of a goddamn movie with no plot. It's just basically an 82-minute fucking horrible nightmare put to fucking film. It's one of the most disturbing and uncomfortable goddamn movies you could ever watch. And I watched that on shrooms, and that was fucking horrible. I felt awful. I mean, I had to like go outside and like breathe, because watching that movie sober is pretty goddamn unsettling. But watching it on any sort of like psychedelic enhancement was like cranking the nightmare dial to fucking 11 or some shit. It was horrible.
Well, that's another thing Dylan mentioned too. There is a profound difference from going into a trip with a co-pilot or, a squad and going alone, man. You trip alone, you're talking about the harshest introspective fucking shit that you will ever experience in your life. You will see yourself finally for what you really are. What you would never admit that you are is put right on the fucking platter in front of you. You're forced to forced to convince yourself to accept it or go mad.
That trip was so wild. I still remember stuff. I'll still be like, wait, I just remembered that for the first time, of like stuff that happened during that trip, because it was so heavy. I remember like at some point, like afterwards, I was like, did I stream during my trip? And I kept asking people, because eventually I made enough noise that other people that I was living with came into the room, and one of them, being a little smarter, was able to quickly determine what was going on. Like, okay, Dylan's on acid. Okay. And I kept asking him, like, did I stream? Did I stream this? Do I look like a fool? Do I look like a moron? Did I stream? He was like, no, Dylan, you didn't stream. Nobody say, did I stream? And just like over and over and over again. That terrified me, the idea that I streamed on acid. And somebody has asked me once, what would it be like if you streamed on acid? That's a terrifying experience to me. I've seen people try to do live streams with that. I know Destiny, a streamer, he once like uploaded like a whole like trip video of him tripping. Oh
Yeah.
my God. I couldn't imagine live streaming on acid. It completely like cracks you open. Being that vulnerable online is impossible. I
have direct experience with this. I have done shows on acid multiple times.
Wow.
And it's a fucking experience, man. It's a whole different ride, whole different ball game. You can feel the eyeballs on you in a way that you kind of, I think that's one of the things that keeps people from getting into streaming is they think about the idea of like, holy fuck, like 900 people are watching me right now. What the fuck, bro? 10,000 people just saw that. You add acid into that mix, you're talking about a whole different fucking ball game.
I feel like the one time that I tried to stream on acid, it was just like I was so introspective that I barely said anything. So I was just kind of like sitting there like,
well, you remember my famous why are they racing on Fruit Loops moment?
yeah.
We tripped on acid on Halloween with a bunch of black lights and fucking strobes in the room and shit and watched videos. That was that's all I remember about that trip.
Man, I that's the main reason I want to go back. When I go back to the States, man, I miss it so much because I can't do that over here for obvious reasons, right? Could you imagine if you're like mid-tripping on acid and like the sirens go off, you got to run down to the bunker? Could you imagine how awful of a trip that would be? So I can't do that here. So I gotta wait till I get back to the States.
What about if you just hunkered in the bunker, you know?
I mean, it isn't impossible. I've thought about this too much, but I can't get it. I can't find, not that I'm looking, but I can't find it anywhere in Ukraine. Can't find acid here.
I feel like, you know, on your journeys, you'll bump into somebody who knows somebody who's got some.
I know. Well, the thing is, I know somebody that knows somebody who's got basically everything here. If I wanted to get it, of course I wouldn't, because I am a law-abiding citizen and I don't want them to take away my press accreditation. I would never do that. But I have not met anybody who can get me acid.
Yeah, I mean that's the fucking hell of acid, is that sometimes it's just not available. But yeah, no, I don't.
Did it used to be more available? I mean, I'm young, so obviously, like, I wouldn't. I assume it was more available in like the 80s or something, right?
Yeah, I feel like in the early mid 90s when I first started dropping acid, that it was I had a guy that could pretty much get it whenever.
Well, wasn't there like some professor that was manufacturing all the acid in like a silo somewhere? Like most of the acid was being made by one dude, and he got busted, so that kind of dried it up a little bit.
I mean, I don't know. I've heard that a lot of the acid was manufactured by one guy before, but I don't know anything beyond that.
You know, another thing that's cool about acid specifically and psychedelics is most drug dealers do not give a fuck about what, a lot of them just don't give a fuck about what they're peddling. Like, if someone's dealing heroin or crack or any of these things, like, most of them are just greedy pieces of shit who's going to get a community on smacker poison, right? Like, terrible stuff. Not the weed dealers is different, but when we're talking about like these hard drugs, fentanyl, opioids, like, nobody's doing this because like, oh, I'm really enthusiastic about fentanyl. Like, me and fentanyl, we go way back. I think fentanyl has a transformative experience. Nobody's saying that shit.
No.
You talk to people who deal acid and shrooms, they're activists, man. They're like, they're ready to go to prison for it. They're ready.
I don't blame them. I mean, I know a lot of
the guy's name was William. The guy's name was William Leonard Pickard.
Oh, okay.
And he was a professor. I guess he's released now. He got released in 2020 on a compassionate release.
Well,
him and his partner did make. They're believed at least to have made the majority of the world's acid during the times they were active. So, and he was basically an activist because he was trying to like bring people to new levels of consciousness and so on and so forth.
I'm formally requesting that Joe Biden give him the Presidential Medal of Freedom.
Me too. I agree with that.
I'm personally requesting that Joe Biden get in the room with fucking Zelensky and Putin right now and drop some fucking acid, and let's figure this out. Let's get Putin
to drop acid and then put him in a big room in a high-story building with a lot of open windows.
Hey, as long as Biden and fucking Zelensky are there too, I'm all for that. Sure, put them up there. Let them all figure it out.
Biden doesn't even need acid to fall out one of those goddamn windows, dude.
Yeah, that's true. Good point.
In fact, I actually have a story about Biden falling yet again.
Oh yeah, I saw that.
It wasn't one of his major spills, but just the fact that there's so many,
I mean, there's gonna be some fucking ads. He's got so many different incidents of just toppling, teetering over like a fucking house of cards.
He's a man. He's an earthy of the earth man, and naturally, being a very grounded individual, he's going to be close to the ground economy,
Right.
you know?
He wants to be close to the earth, close to the soil.
Yes.
Yeah, no, I don't know. That's a whole different fucking ball of wax there. The fact that all of this foreign policy is basically being overseen and ultimately decided on by a dude that doesn't know where he is half the time.
Man, Joe Biden has surprised me on Ukraine. He has a lot of experience on the Senate and the Foreign Relations Committee. A lot of experience with foreign policy. Definitely during vice president, he tried to be involved in foreign
he
policy.
forgot it all.
I honestly, I don't think that's the case. I think people exaggerate it. I do know he fumbles on his words at times, and he has like old man syndrome.
At times, more like every fucking word out of his mouth. Is a fumble.
How often do you actually sit down like Biden speech? I'm gonna sit down.
We've done it. We've done it before.
Way more than your average people.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
I do too, and he does fumble on his words, not nearly as much. It depends on the day on one hand, but also not nearly as much as
it's not even really like the word fumbling is one thing.
Yeah, it's more like the mush mouth.
The thing is, I have sympathy with that because I'm mush mouthed. I'll lisp or I'll stumble on my words.
Not compared to Joe Biden.
I've had a conversation with you.
He's lost the step for sure. So
I've had a conversation with you just in the first couple hours of the show that would be functionally impossible to have with Joe Biden.
I don't know.
You might be mush mouth, but not on the level he is, man. The thing that bothers me most about Biden is not the fucking stumbles and the malappropriation of words. It's the fucking just the way that every sentence he speaks devolves into kind of a mushy, I don't know where this is going kind of zone.
Yeah, he loses his train of thought an awful lot.
Yeah,
especially for a leader of the free world.
I do think that Joe Biden is not a tremendously good public speaker. I do think loses his trains of thought is actually, I think that more accurately points it out. But when it comes to foreign policy and specifically Ukraine, he has been like weirdly balanced in a way and much better than I expected from him. I think he's had a very good balance on the war. If anything, I feel like in some areas I would want him to be more aggressive, but he of course has to consider, of course the nuclear element and how much he wants America to get involved, and he's done better than I expected, honestly.
You said earlier that one of your biggest criticisms of Biden is the kind of drips and drabs of stuff that he's sending. I think that that's by design. I think that the drips and drabs are happening because it's in the best interests of Biden's donors for this war to fucking slog on for as long as fucking possible.
Nah, I don't buy that. I think there's a lot more likely explanations. For example, one of the biggest things we drip and drab on, which is a big issue, is artillery shipments. 70% of the people who die in this war, military-wise, they're getting killed by artillery, right? The majority of interactions I've had where like I've been in life-threatening situations or my buddies have been, it's artillery. Most of the times it's not small arms fire, it's not ATACMS or like these other like high-profile weapons that are getting attention, like the javelins, stuff like that, or RPGs. It's almost certainly artillery. And the artillery shipments that we're making to Ukraine are just not up to cuff. And I don't think that's because we don't want them to win. I think it's because our artillery production is just not
I don't think it's because we don't want them to win either. I think it's because we don't want them to win quickly.
I think if that was,
I think if they had enough artillery, they might push the Russians back, and this fuck.
How are we
gonna make these hand over fist billions of dollars if we don't really have an excuse to send weapons anymore?
Well, I think that no matter what, the weapons industry is going to make a lot of money off of Ukraine, because once the war's over, they're going to rebuild Ukraine's military. They're going to integrate them on Western equipment. They're going to integrate them on the F-16 fighter program. They're going to integrate them on Western or NATO standard artillery shells. So weapons manufacturers are going to be making this money no matter what. They could make more money the longer the war drags out. But I don't think Biden has an interest in dragging this war out as long as possible, because he doesn't know how long the American people are going to support this war.
I don't think he has an interest in that either. I think his donors have an interest in that.
So you think his donors are like,
if Biden thought that the people that support him
Mhm.
could make more money with a quick solution to this, I think we would have seen something a lot more like TJ's proposed solution. I think we would have seen an
My
immediate,
my crazy solution.
yeah, an
That wouldn't-
immediate
I wouldn't
explosion
advocate
of
it at this point, by the way. Yeah, it would have had to have been done like
sure.
early on.
I honestly I think there's much easier explanations. For example, like with the shipments of the artillery shells, we are not producing enough artillery shells to make up for the amount of artillery shells that the Ukrainians are using. That's why we're doing everything to go to all these old Soviet countries and be like, please give us your old Soviet stockpiles so they can use it with their old Soviet weapons. We're trying to up production in like plants in Pennsylvania and across the country, but there's just not enough being produced. And that's part of the reason why we sent over cluster munitions in the first place, is because we're not producing enough artillery
I mean,
shells as it is.
scarcity creates value, right? In a capitalist system.
So you think, but we're not selling these weapons. They're not making money by us.
I
sending
mean,
them.
it's being tacked on to an ever-growing debt bill that will
Right.
never.
Well,
be
we're
paid
not
back.
we're not selling the weapons, but we're buying. Like
We're
paying
lending
weapons
them at interest.
but we're paying weapons manufacturers to make the weapons in the first place.
Some of the weapons, yes. Other weapons, old.
So I mean,
Vietnam,
like someone's pockets being lined along the
Right.
way.
If these
so.
things, if these things are
during-
just flush if these factories are just fucking cranking this shit out faster than the Ukrainians can use them up, they can't charge $5,000 a round.
the
you know,
Ukrainians will pay for would want every single round that could be possibly produced, and there's other competing companies that could also produce these weapons if the manufacturing is not up to cuff, and somebody's artificially keeping the amount of weapons like low while there's a high demand for weapons. Some weapon manufacturer, some weapons dealer somewhere is going to try to go in there to fulfill the demand.
Unless, as I would fucking contend, they're all part of the same conglomerate, and they realize that it is in the best interests of their industry to keep these weapons at a low number so that the price tag that's tacked on to the American fucking defense appropriations can be as high as possible. That's just basic business, right?
I think it would be more basic business to try to sell as many of weapons as possible, wouldn't it?
No,
Well, you might be able
because
to sell more over-
then you sell a weapon cheaper on the round. If the system is flush with these
Is that-
weapons,
Well, the thing is,
that's how it works.
But there's not. I don't think it's met to the point. I don't think it's met the point where to produce more shells is to make less money. To produce more weapons to make less money. They would have to. I think you would have to.
They're not going to let
weapons
it.
like diamonds.
Well, think
My
about this.
intention is the
Well, think
reason
about- well, hold
the
on,
reason
think-
that you
think
see
about
the
this.
drips, the
Think about
reason
this,
you
though,
see the
too.
drips and drabs
Okay, go
that
ahead.
you do, the reason you see the drips and drabs that you do is because they're not allowing it to get to that point.
Well, think
I
about this,
agree,
too.
we
If you-
haven't
if
reached
you
that
sent-
point. I don't think that the military-industrial complex is going to allow us to get to that point.
If you sent like
It would
a
mean they
pretty
make
much,
less money.
if you sent pretty much like an adequate amount of weapons to just resolve this shit, then what are the chances of those weapons being destroyed in that conflict? They're lower. But if you send just enough to like keep things going, like those
Yeah,
get
they're gonna
destroyed,
be
they need to be
firing-
replaced.
They're
You know,
going to be
so, I mean, there's-
firing every fucking round you can send them and begging for
And
more.
then,
Then
you
they'll
know,
pay whatever.
And I mean, it's not really a matter. I mean, the Ukrainians at this point are not paying for these weapons. I mean, they'll probably end
Well,
up paying
some
in
of
some
them.
other ways down the line. But oh yeah, well, some of them are being sold at like a
Some of them are also being lend
sweetheart
lease.
rate and shit.
Yeah, it's a
Loan lease and
lend
then-
lease. So this
but,
will
like-
be this is being
But
tacked
I think
onto
it's
their national
primarily.
debt.
I think you know what Paul's saying though. I think it's probably more likely that it's lining the pockets of like weapons manufacturers than it is, you know, the U.S. government selling to Ukraine. I think it's more just like, hey, you know, these people make more money. They have more money to give in campaign contributions to like whatever politicians they own. You know, so I think it kind of just boils down to that. I mean, they're probably making money in multiple angles, even ones I probably can't even see because I'm not enough of an insider in that world to know all of the little, you know, ways that they can, you know,
It just-
suck profit out of.
There's so little motivation for the allies of Ukraine to want this war, I think, to keep going as long as possible if they can win it soon. I think it wouldn't make sense for
Well, I
Biden
think that there's,
because
I mean, there's probably a lot of actors in this scenario, you know, who are that's probably true of, but I think there's definitely people who probably, I mean, no matter what the conditions are in a society, someone's benefiting.
And
So
there's-
there's
in
definitely
fact,
people
yeah,
out there that
There's no
that benefit.
probably. There's
There's
no
definitely people out there
probably,
that
DJ.
benefit from a prolonged conflict
Absolutely.
that might have you know, some decision making power.
I do believe that there are certain people that would profit from the war going on as long as possible, but I don't think that that profits incentive is enough to overwhelm all of the other parties at play to completely dominate our foreign policy agenda to make it so we're just dribbling it. We're not even trying to achieve victory in the short term. We just want it in the long distance future. We're just going to keep this going as long as possible because we're also tacking on to the national debt. We're also have only so much time we can have the American public support this war. If this goes on for 6-7 years, the idea we're going to have the same amount of support we have now for Ukraine as we would 7 years from now, I mean, that's debatable at the very least. It's probably going to go down.
I mean,
and so if you're Joe Biden,
the United
right?
States government has never really relied too much on the support. I mean, like
doesn't
the Iraq War was very popular when it started. It got very unpopular, but it didn't end it. You know, it wasn't like, the war is unpopular, now we got to stop.
Well, the reason why the war in Iraq was doesn't get as much attention is not probably the deaths going. Okay, I don't want to get too off beat here, but it is true that we can engage in wars for a longer period of time with low death counts because we have low death counts, and so it's harder to build up public opposition based on the people who are dying. But when it comes to budgeting expenses and how much money we've wasted, we're already seeing a growing opposition in the House from certain people in the Republican Party against sending aid, with 1/3 of Republicans in the House recently voting for in a recent defense authorization to try to cut the president from being able to send aid to Ukraine. And that is likely to grow to some extent within the Republican Party at the very least. And that opposition could build up more and more and more, where you're facing an LBJ situation where you're saying, okay, I'm not going to run for re-election because it's too unpopular. We've wasted too much money. We've wasted too many lives. And so
that opposition could very well be tokenistic as well.
I think if Joe Biden was to win this war or help Ukraine win this war, the benefits of getting that victory, definitely before Election Day, outweigh the benefits of keeping certain weapon manufacturers rich for a very long time, so you convince all the allies to kind of like maybe
I agree
trickle it in.
They outweigh the benefits for Joe Biden personally, maybe, but I don't know if he necessarily. I guess he can call that shot, but he represents the broader interests of the Democrat Party, and they might be more interested in pleasing their donors than they are getting Joe Biden reelected.
They certainly are. There's no might be.
But I don't think that
more interested in pleasing their donors than they are.
But their donors aren't only the weapons defense manufacturers. They have a ton
of
other donors,
but those
some of whom
those
would like
industries
to
are
see
heavily
peace in
tied.
Europe as soon as possible.
Some of those are all of those weapons manufacturers are heavily tied to petroleum manufacturers and shit. It's not just one.
I mean, it's almost certainly true that there are moneyed interests that would like to start economically exploiting Ukraine as quickly as possible too.
There are also moneyed interests that would like to reopen ties to one of the most resource-rich countries in the world, Russia.
Well, that's what I said. Oh, sorry. No, you were talking about Russia. No, that's true too. Yeah, I think there's probably a lot of people who are mad that their business in Russia has stopped producing. The rupee might not be competitive with the dollar, but I'm sure there was
the rupee.
The rupee. What is it?
The rupee? You mean the ruble?
Ruble. Yeah, sorry. I'm like Legend of Zelda land. Sorry, I need to stop hitting this vape, I guess.
Man, their economy is really going down the drain if they've reverted to like pre-industrial economics.
Rupees, man.
I really dislike political analysis, and this isn't. I'm not trying to pick on you. I really dislike political analysis where we look for intention, but then we also don't look for any like concrete thing to back up that intention, because you can find intentions anywhere for a million different people with different motivations that could allege a million different conspiracies to do a million
right.
But
I don't think
that's how.
I don't think that what we're saying is far fetched as just throwing out a conspiracy. Let me give you an example.
I do think it is a little. I don't think it's far-fetched that there's people who are profiting from the war. I do think it's far-fetched that Biden possibly dribbled the aid in the early days and still dribbles aid to a certain extent today in Ukraine because he wants to keep this war going on as long as possible to please those specific donors. That is a far-fetched because there's other, I think, better explanations. I think there's better explanations.
I believe that Biden himself will personally benefit.
Not just him. The United States would benefit.
It's not just his
NATO
donors.
would benefit. There'd be so many people that benefit.
Yeah, let's
right. It's not just his donors. His money is tied up in hedge funds and shit that are all fucking that own this stock. You know what I mean? It's all interconnected. So we're not alleging some fucking like deep state conspiracy where the fucking Raytheon has taken over the White House or whatever. What I'm saying is this is just standard business practice. Business has incredible, indomitable influence in American politics, and it is in the best interests of weapon manufacturers for any armed conflict that's being supported by the United States to go on for as long as possible.
I mean, we've seen a
And I
whole
don't
host
think
of
it's
issues.
far-fetched. I don't think it's far-fetched to assume that knowing that corporate influence in our government exists and is so strong that it overrides the will of the people.
I mean, look at
I
look
think
at
in this
look
instance,
at look at
I do
debates
think
like
it's far-fetched to
look at debates
assume-
like universal health care and stuff. I mean, like, there's so many things that would be to the benefit of the country that are popular among the people that are not done, and we all know the reason why they're not done is because of the influence of corporate money. So I mean, I don't think you
Medicare-
can dismiss that as a possibility for anything.
Medicare for all polls in the high
Policy-wise.
70s, usually fucking increased minimum wage polls in the, you know, like it's not rocket science to make the very grounded assumption that our politics, especially at the highest level, are heavily influenced by capital.
I do think that I don't think it's far-fetched to say that politics is influenced by capital. That is, of course, true. I do think it's far-fetched to make assumptions about the motivations that Biden had when those early days he was dribbling the aid as he slowly increased the amount of aid that we're sending.
I mean,
to
both
Ukraine.
you know, any argument on this
I-
has to assume some you know, intentions.
Well,
on
well
Biden's
okay,
part.
but listen to this intention that I think this intention is much more clear, because this is the intention that that Western governments have stated, not only Biden, but I think the German government, the French government, other governments as well. In those early days, the first month, and second month, and third month into the war, they didn't know how good Ukraine was going to perform. They didn't know if the Russians were just going to conquer the entire country, or they were just going to like they were going to be repelled. They had no clue.
It was more touch and go, right?
It was more touch and go. And so if you're going to drop your F-16s in a country that could collapse in the next month, that would be pretty ridiculous and embarrassing for your government if on national television the Russians were just like, they send these jets over and we capture them, it's now our F-16. It'd be extremely embarrassing if that
Are we
happened.
pretending this isn't an oligarchy? I mean, someone is, but
Well, I'm not trying to pretend that we don't have corruption or that capital doesn't influence politics, but we shouldn't make assumptions based upon what nation states are doing.
That's stopping shy of calling it an oligarchy though, right? So would you say the United States is an oligarchy? Yes or no?
Not in the way in textbooks, but capital does influence.
How about de facto oligarchy?
De facto oligarchy? I probably would not make that.
I mean, come on, is this even fucking debatable, Dylan?
Not really.
I
don't think it is.
Because it has to be to support your position, right?
Okay,
it has
but
to be
to be
debatable
clear,
in order for you to assume some fucking
okay. Let me ask you a question:
Are
there any? Is there any democracy on the planet? Is there a single democracy on Earth?
No.
I mean,
well, then
I would say
that would be my difference.
My answer would be a little different. I would say that there are governments which are to some degree democratic on this earth. Are there any like true undiluted democracies? Absolutely not. No.
I think a democracy diluted by capital influence is not a democracy. It's a subversion of the term. So government of the people, by the people, for the people, but rich people get to buy the outcomes of government. That's not a democracy.
Right.
Are you a Marxist or a communist?
I don't use those labels. No, I don't. I'm a whatever I am. People have called me a post-left anarchist before.
I think you're just a fucking hippie, dude.
Well, I am. I mean, I'm not going to fucking contend with that. I am. I will fucking admit I do align a whole lot with the stated goals of the hippie movement for sure.
So I do want to put out here that if Ukraine was to, about this money and interest thing, if Ukraine was to lose the war, and if the war drags on for too long, that is also, while I think the chances of them completely losing like all their territory are very low, there is a possibility that the less land and territory and resources that Ukraine has, the less weapons that they can buy, and the less powerful their military is going to be after the war. And so there is a motivation, I think, to some degree, no matter how this ends for the weapons manufacturers, for there to be an existent, powerful Ukraine.
Let me ask you.
Well, I mean, isn't it all going to come out
question.
in the wash? If we push it too far to the line and we drip and drab until Ukraine just can't fucking fight back anymore, isn't that going to precipitate a giant weapons buying bonanza amongst NATO countries?
What do you mean?
Isn't that going to? I mean, just what I said.
Okay, so if we drip weapons into Ukraine, does that mean NATO countries will buy more weapons?
If we drip weapons into Ukraine, and in the long run, Ukraine eventually loses and cedes the Donbass or whatever ends up happening, NATO spending is going to go fucking through the roof.
Well, NATO spending
because Russia
already
has
going
just shown that it can claim territory. Right, I know it's already through the roof, but this contention that, you know, if the war drags on in Ukraine, it's going to somehow hurt the pocketbooks of defense manufacturers. I just don't buy it.
In the words of Joe Biden.
I guess my primary difference with you on this is that I cannot make these assumptions based on Joe Biden's motivations for doing this. And I wouldn't make this assumption because I think there's, again, an easier explanation about why they dripped and dragged in the early days and why now they're picking it up. And the two main motivations would be early days, don't know if it's going to collapse, government's going to collapse. And the second one, escalation, with the idea that if we send more and more weapons, it could escalate the conflict. Now, with time, that threat seems to have kind of subsided. The idea that if we send the tanks, nuclear war is going to start, that wasn't true. F-16, well, that gets approved.
Well, maybe people's concern about that has subsided, but I think that the very real possibility that sending certain types of weapons to Ukraine is going to constitute an escalation is still just as fucking valid as it ever was.
How could so
just because Putin hasn't launched the nukes because we sent some F-16s doesn't mean he won't launch the nukes if we send more.
What weapons could we send at this point that could escalate the conflict tremendously?
More fighter jets is the first thing that comes to mind. Having more militarily superior fighter jets right on the border of your country, I think could be seen as I think America would see that as provocative. If all of a sudden the USSR was stashing a bunch of MiGs in Cuba, I think America would be a fucking bee's nest of concern about that, right?
I mean, it would be somewhat self-imposed if we invaded Cuba. They could have concerns about.
Well, I'm not saying we invade Cuba.
Even if we did invade Cuba, it would still be. You would still be concerned about that. Like
America would be shitting bricks.
There's two of you. There's only one of me. Okay.
I'm sorry.
So when it comes to Russia and Ukraine, the Russians can't really escalate the war much more than they have. They've committed just about everything they have to commit outside of maybe one or two more waves of mobilization, which doesn't get them new tanks, doesn't get them new rifles.
Do you know
doesn't
that
get them new equipment? Yeah. I mean,
because I've been hearing that same rhetoric throughout this campaign. Russia is on the verge of breaking if Ukraine can push them back.
That's not what I said. I said they can't
kind
escalate.
of what you're saying, right? You're saying Russia is on the verge of not being...
Let me tell you what I said instead of you telling me what I said.
Okay.
I said they can't escalate it any further, that they've committed everything they can commit. That doesn't mean they're on the brink of collapse. We couldn't escalate the war against Japan any further in 1944. That doesn't mean we were on the brink of collapse.
We did, though, didn't we?
Yeah, we figured something out.
We kind of escalated that war, didn't we?
We fire. My point being that the Russians can't really escalate past the point that they've gone to because they've gone all in. They've done everything they can.
They're not all in. They have
nukes.
So
the nukes. So I have no good reason to believe that the Russians are considering the use of nuclear weapons, or that I think that there is a large risk that
whether you think that could be an escalation though. Like
that is the only option I think they have really left for escalation. Maybe. And if they were to go through with that would be a tremendously can we say, I don't want to say the R slur. That would be a tremendously moronic thing for the Russian government to do. Not only because
I agree with that.
Not only because of the international not only because I don't think it would make Ukraine submit. I think there's a decent chance they drop a nuke and the Ukrainians still say no. I mean, that's the sentiment I hear on the ground, but who knows until it actually happens. But I also think that it would probably box in the Russians, and it's one of the few scenarios where the Chinese and the Indians could agree to a price cap. And now that 50% reduction in Russian energy profits and Russian government profits is now what? 80% drop, 90% drop, as they can't export goods to India and China because they The Indians don't want to embolden the use of nuclear weapons because they have the Pakistanis on their border. The Chinese don't want to because they don't want the mad dog in North Korea to get any ideas about what he could do on the peninsula and get an idea of maybe I could use this and reunite it. Maybe we can get the Americans to back off. There's so many motivations from the entirety of the world for them not to use a nuke. And we have gotten reports recently that even Xi himself has told him, do not use a nuclear weapon. I'm telling you not to use it, which leads me to believe that if he was to use a nuclear weapon at this point, the end result, even though it would be on a humanitarian level extremely destructive for the Ukrainians, it would be geopolitically a disaster for the Russians.
Okay,
and that's why they pulled back from it.
How about this as a non-nuclear escalation? You just invoked the name of Xi Jinping.
Yeah.
What if Russia goes, okay, you don't want us to use nukes, you give us some tanks and machine guns and fighter jets, comrade. Come.
That is a real possibility that a lot of people are scared about, that the idea that the Chinese could start to send over weapons. So far, there's been no evidence that they've started doing that. I saw one political report that said some machine guns had ended up in Russia that had been mismarked as hunting rifles, but it was like 1,000. It was like
was this misinformation? Weren't there drones as well that were Chinese?
It could have been Chinese drone parts, possibly like electronics,
Chinese manufactured drones that were shot down.
I
seem to remember several news stories about that.
It could have been like one of those dinky kind of like drones that drop grenades, because a lot of people like those, you can buy those for like $2,000, or it would have been, I think, drone parts. I doubt that they gave them military grade.
So they give them tank parts, they give them machine gun parts, they give them.
I do think there's a significant difference between the electronic innards of like a commercial drone and tank parts. There's no pacifist use of tank parts.
You do concede that China, if it were inclined to help Russia, could very easily do so and refresh Russia's military hardware pretty easily and pretty substantially, right?
I don't know how much it could refresh Russia's military hardware, because they have their own hardware systems which are different than the Russians.
Well, I mean, they're going to start using Chinese ones if they have to, just like Ukrainians are using American ones.
At the very least, they could be helpful for the Russians in Ukraine. They could help supply them. That's absolutely true.
That's a non-nuclear escalation then.
Yeah, but Putin doesn't have control of China. The Chinese are not like Russian.
But we don't know how much of an overture Putin's even made at this point. Like, Putin makes them a sweetheart enough deal, they might fucking do it. Especially if he gets desperate, right?
I guess so. It depends on what type of deal they could propose. I mean, I don't know. Maybe starts offering them land or something. I don't know what kind of deal that they would propose that would make the Chinese think, okay, if we lose access to Western markets, that's okay. I'm willing to give you tank parts in exchange for possibly losing access to billions upon billions upon billions of more market share than is currently available in Russia.
I don't know if America would be really willing to cut off the China tit either, though.
The Californian economy is larger than the Russian economy. And we're not just talking about the Californian economy. We're talking about the American economy, basically the majority of the European economy. And you're comparing that to Russia. As much as the Chinese would very much like to have a productive relationship with Russia and likes that Russia challenges the United States on the global stage, they don't want to lose access to these markets. In fact, Xi Jinping has been making a huge stink about recently how he has gotten the Russians to commit to not using a nuke, and he's trying to use that in Europe to be like, hey, look at me, I'm great, please keep good relations with me, as America's trying to court the Europeans to, be against the Chinese in the Pacific and supporting of Taiwan. So the Chinese have so much outside of the purview of just the Russians that I don't think it's at all a guarantee that even if Putin was to make the best offer he could to the Chinese, that they would take it. They have other markets and other countries that they worry about that it would spoil the relationship with.
I mean,
they would spoil the relationship with the Poles.
You realize that you have to be right about everything you've said for this to work, right?
I have to be right about the Chinese having interests outside of Russia. I think I'm right about.
You have to you have to be right about the Chinese. You have to be right about the Chinese. You have to be right about
every single fucking variable in that equation.
You have to be right about the Chinese making
across all of these equations and all of these political calculations you're making. It just seems like
that's not true.
You know everything that's going to happen.
I don't think that's not. I
think you're like, oh,
wait.
I really you've got it all figured out.
That's not the case.
That's what it feels like.
If I
from where I'm sitting, it feels like I'm willing to admit I have a huge degree of uncertainty about all these things, but you're so fucking sure about every single thing you say.
Well, I mean,
and if you're wrong about even one, it all falls apart.
I have researched this thing a tiny bit.
I mean, that's fine. I'm not saying you have research. Obviously, you know
I
a
am
lot.
not saying
I'm
I
not
know
fucking,
for
I'm
sure.
not challenging your knowledge. I'm
I'm
challenging
not saying I know
your
for sure this is going to happen.
infallibility. Are you
I'm
a
not
fucking
saying this
god?
is infallible. I never said it was infallible. I don't know what he's. I think you're just straw manning me, TJ.
I'm not trying to straw man you.
Yeah, I think you are a little bit. I never
No?
said I was infallible. I never said that these are the things that are destined to happen. I'm talking about the real strategic interest that the Chinese have outside of the Russians.
Yeah, I think there's
A
too
lot
much
of-
strategizing going on, is what I'm saying.
Well, you got to think of. I mean, that's how you engage in foreign policy. You have to think about people's. If you don't look
Yeah,
from
I
the
mean, that's-
perspective of the people you negotiate with, you'll never understand why they're asking for what they asked for in negotiations.
Yeah, but like you got to be more open to the possibility of things going fucking terribly wrong.
Of course, I'm open to the possibility of things
It doesn't.
going
It
terribly
seems
wrong.
like you're very not open to the possibility of things
No,
going
wait,
terribly wrong.
no,
You're very optimistic on a lot of fronts.
It's if somebody says the Russians could escalate by getting weapons from the Chinese, I am going to have to talk about in response to that what type of barriers are between the Russians sending weapons to the Chinese. I'm just going to have to bring it up because I know TJ isn't going to bring it up. I know Paul isn't going to bring it up. Were you going to bring it up? So someone had to bring it up.
All right,
Sure.
fair
I
enough.
mean, I wasn't. You're acting like we're saying it's a foregone conclusion that China's going to send weapons.
Well, no, I'm not saying that
never said
either.
that.
But
I
you're
said it
saying
was
that
a
I said that.
I said it was a possibility.
It is a possibility. I didn't
Russia
say
to
it was not a
escalate.
possibility. I just don't think it's a particularly likely possibility, as the Chinese are bragging about it right now that they're not doing it in order to try to get a better relationship with the Europeans.
Well, the
because
China they would never lie in order to foster a better relation.
I'm not saying. Well, of course they could lie and they could smuggle it, but that's risky, isn't it? That's a risky move to smuggle weapons into Russia.
that calculus as the war drags on, you know,
TJ,
how
so
do you
start-
know?
No,
how
I did
that-
not. Wait,
how
I
that's
did not
gonna be
say I was
worked
going to
out?
start World War III. I said I was going to fucking draw a line in the sand that if Russia crosses it, it would be World War III. That's because they wouldn't cross that line. Russia would
really.
No one in a
This is
million
really at
years
the
is
heart-
going to fucking promulgate World War III. That's to no one's benefit. So basically, anyone who draws that line, which, you know, obviously Russia has used that to its advantage on plenty of fucking occasions. There is a line that Russia has said, if you cross this line, it's nuclear war. So why didn't America do the same if we really cared so much about this fucking Ukraine shit? We could have locked it down like that. Russia, this Ukraine's in NATO now. You can't have it. Fuck you. We did it. You fucking step one foot in here. It's war, bitch.
America's still dithering on that.
Right.
Why?
Well, okay, so that would have been American troops on the ground in Ukraine day one fighting Russian troops, right?
Mhm.
I don't think most Americans would have supported another foreign intervention in that way. In fact, the polling data that is currently represented shows the majority of Americans don't support
When has that
I mean,
ever mattered
yeah, I
to
was
our
gonna
fucking
say,
I
government?
think that did
when
matter.
does
Wait,
American
that
support
did matter. Wait, okay.
driven foreign
Number
policy?
one, that's part of the reason why LBJ resigned in 1968. His government. I almost
A
called
lot
it
of
due
things
to
have
the
changed since
anti-war movement.
1968.
Wait, come. Well, wait.
Due to the
Let me.
anti-war
I gotta.
movement.
Let me
and their
finish a. Let me
constant-
finish a
All
point
right, all right,
before
all right, all right.
you know
Sorry.
somebody jumps
Sometimes
on my dick.
it gets like that here. I'm sorry. It's
It's okay.
not just you. It's just how it is.
But it's not just LBJ. Trump, in part, got elected on an anti-war agenda when he was. Remember him on the Republican debate stage, railing Jeb Bush about his father's war, and not his father's war, his brother's war. They're brothers, right? Brothers.
Yeah,
yes.
and I remember him holding up an LGBT flag and saying that he was for them too. You know, like he made promises. Sure.
But we also withdrew from Afghanistan, and Biden was somebody who's been wanting to withdraw from Afghanistan since I think like 2012 during the Obama administration. He was yelling at staffers saying that the war was fucking like stupid and we should leave.
Yeah, it's
And-
unsellable.
And so Biden is somebody who I think is somewhat more particularly attuned, definitely more than like Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama, to the interest of the average person not wanting to send their kids overseas and die in a war. I don't know if that came from that's just from the rhetoric I've heard from him. I don't know if that came from his own son's personal service and the idea, or if it came from something else. I don't know. But I do know that Biden, from the start of the war, made a heavy commitment not to put troops on the ground because he knew how unpopular it would be. And if we do something that unbelievably unpopular in supporting Ukraine, there's a good chance that if another presidency gets elected and it's somebody like Donald Trump, they're probably just going to abandon Ukraine. And so it was better to find a way we could support Ukraine while not putting any American soldiers at risk, which most Americans seem to be happy with. And I think it was the wise decision. I think it was the smart decision. I also don't think I'm not as confident in you that if we were just to say we'll nuke you if you touch Ukraine at all, that they would listen. Would they also withdraw from Crimea? Would they withdraw from the rest of the Donetsk and Luhansk?
I don't know.
I mean, I think
I think once the conflict is on, it's kind of too late to do that. I think that has to be something you do.
Has to be a
at
card
the
that you
start.
play before the invasion.
Right. That has to be like, it's just basically like, we're going to disincentivize you from doing this with such strong, like so strongly that you're going to do the calculus and be like, it's not worth it.
It's the difference between you're not getting any more territory to now you're losing territory and we're making inroads.
Here's a good question. How do you make them believe you? And that's the credibility on these types of claims that you'd be willing to end the world over Ukraine. That type of credibility is important if you're going to get the Russians to actually back down.
Because the way you do that is like, you just say like, look, I'm not the one that's willing to end the world. I'm drawing a line and saying you're going to be the one to make the choice to end the world. Russia, are you willing to end the world to get this territory?
If you said that no one is willing to end the world over, nobody wants to end the world, it's against everyone's interests. Couldn't they
if you were Russia, would you roll those dice?
If you were,
I wouldn't.
I actually don't know. But if I was Vladimir Putin and we had your same thinking in mind, like nobody's going to use nukes because nukes, is not in anyone's interest. He could make the determination they're bluffing. It's not in their interest to use the nukes and end the war over Ukraine.
Well, how many times have we been scared off of things that would have been in our interest to avoid a Russia, counter nuclear attack?
That's why Crimea is in Russian hands now.
Right. So I mean, like, there's been plenty of times where that exact strategy has worked for Russia, and that's why I think they'd understand it. So
I think the problem would be it would be such a stark change in American policy towards Ukraine so quickly. It would be very hard to make it seem very believable to the Russians.
I'm not even saying we should have done it. I'm just saying if we really are serious about this Ukraine shit, we should have done it.
I think that ignores what I suspect, and I think Dylan disagrees with this. In fact, I know he does. What I suspect is the actual motivation behind our support of Ukraine at the highest governmental positions. I don't think it has anything to do with protecting the people of Ukraine. I think it has everything to do with profiting on yet another military excursion. And I don't, that's, to me, that's not a good enough reason to escalate a war.
I think a lot of people look at wars in a very one-dimensional way, as in this is the reason the war started. Here is the singular reason. I don't know, that's not what I doubt you're saying this is the singular reason, or this is the reason that Sweden says this has this government position, or this is the reason that this government has this. These wars are especially unbelievably complicated when it comes to motivation and like conflicting interests. And sure. I can believe 100% that there are people in the United States Congress right now that support Ukraine because they have a lot of Ukrainian residents in their community and they want to support Ukraine because they have, a very large voter base who cares about that, or that they personally are sympathetic to the Ukrainian struggle for independence, so they're going to vote for any like defense shipments over to them to support Ukraine, or there could be people who support it purely because they want to undermine the Russians because they view them as a strategic rival. There's
unless the majority whip of their party tells them what their priorities are going to be. Yeah, farther down the trough, they might have that concern. Oh, this is what my constituents want. But time has shown, like history has shown time and again, Dylan, and you know this, that there are pressures that can be applied on politicians to get them to reverse course. And it's my argument that that's happening way more than you give it credit for.
I do think it's not that I give it credit way more than I'm saying that these pressures exist, but there's also other things involved as well. Genuine positive motivations to be supporting Ukraine. But putting that aside for a moment, because I just wanted to add that level of complexity that there are people who genuinely care about these things.
I don't deny it.
But I also want to put forward that even if it is somewhat selfish, many countries engage in self-interest on the world stage. In fact, many people would say that's only how nations engage on the world stage is through self-interest. It depends on how much of a real.
Like the Kissinger quote, right? So
it wasn't just Kissinger, but I maybe what was the Kissinger quote?
It was America doesn't have friends, we only have interests.
God, that is a Kissinger quote. What a piece of shit.
Yes,
but
but it's basically what you just said.
If
there's
I'm saying
Kissinger in you right now.
Well, I think everyone has to believe that to an extent. All nations advocate on upon themselves. Like all
That's why,
voters.
I mean, well,
go
I
out and have
mean,
their own
I mean,
interests.
ultimately, we don't really,
But
you
if
know, we're not
our
in the whole
interests-
nation thing super much here, but you know,
But-
I mean, yeah.
whether or not those people have that motivation, if the end result is still more positive, not only for Ukraine, but for Europe, and I think global stability as a whole, then whether or not that person is on my team for this specific conflict, that is not a gigantic concern for me. What would be a concern for me is if I then transferred that and then I said, now I support weapon shipments to the Saudi government to bomb Yemen. Now I support the embargo on Cuba. Let's topple the government and replace it. Now I support an intervention in Venezuela to overthrow them. Then once you've allowed them to completely just dominate your worldview, that's when it becomes a problem. But you can work with somebody you disagree with as to why they support an issue. An example. I probably have different reasons for wanting to end the drug war than, say, some Republican libertarian type. Maybe their reason is I just want to lower taxes and we're wasting too much money on this. I don't really even care about the druggies, right? Whereas my perspective would be, I think that's up for each person to make those types of decisions about their own body, and you should not,
Sure.
criminalize sickness.
We talk about, I'm a big labor advocate, and labor is another space where, you might not, I as a leftist might not word my argument the same way that a right-wing guy that's, sick of the fucking boss makes a dollar, I make a dime, that's why I shit on company time guy. You know what I mean? But ultimately, in the labor space, we can be allies. So I totally agree with you on that point. In fact, I think that more of that needs to happen outside of the political sphere.
It's true.
That being said, look, and I think this is just a matter of perspective. I do not buy your argument that there are better angels at work here behind the scenes, and that money is just a secondary concern.
It's not a secondary concern, but it's one of many concerns.
Sure. Well, I'll concede that. I think where we differ is I think it's the dominant concern. I think it's the concern that takes precedence over all other concerns.
That I would disagree with. I would say probably primarily it's security concerns. NATO,
security. But I'm sorry to interrupt you, but security.
I know it's a buzzword. I could explain the specific security concern.
Okay.
So if you're a European nation state like Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, or Poland, right, and you saw what the Russians were demanding before this invasion, they were asking for the nuclear umbrella to no longer cover much of Eastern Europe. They were asking such huge demands that everyone knew they were never going to get, that many people considered it a non-starter. But I don't think it was only a non-starter. I think there's a chance that maybe even if those things were offered, the Russians may have delayed the war. I think it only would have been a delay. I don't think they would have called it off, maybe delay it another year, make more demands. This is how strongmen operate, right? You get what you want for a little bit, then you come back and do the same tactic, right? The mafia doesn't go away once you've paid them. Now that you know you're going to pay them, they're going to come back. I think for Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, and many nation states in Europe, the security concerns are a lot more present than many of us Americans appreciate. And knowing that a lot of American prosperity has been built upon the transatlantic alliance, was built upon the rebuilding of much of Germany, rebuilding much of Europe, to have a good economic relationship with these people, it is both in the interest of the United States and the interest of these European powers to not only promote stability in Europe, with this being the largest invasion in European history since World War II, but also to stop the encroachment of the Russians in conquering territory in this way.
Right, but
that's why NATO expanded in the way it did to include these nation states. And
what do you think is at the heart of that concern in stopping Russian expansion? What does Russian expansion represent to capital?
What does Russian expansion? I guess it represents a different type of. I mean, it's a different type of capital.
It represents
not like they're communist.
It represents a slipping grip on capital.
It
represents the capital concerns being handed over to another geopolitical opponent of ours. So that support, and I don't know how you could argue for that or against that.
I do think that if we were to if Russians were to annex Ukraine, we would have no access to their resources. Probably we would have no access to a ton of stuff there that would be beneficial for like many Western countries to have. But on top of that economic concerns, which by the way, if the Ukrainians want to sell us resources, or the Ukrainians want to engage in this economic relationship with the West, I think that's their choice. And from what we saw in 2014 with the protests during Euromaidan, in reaction to Yanukovych backing down and entering an association agreement with the EU, and all the polling that I've seen since, the vast majority of Ukrainians want to enter NATO. The vast majority of Ukrainians want to enter the EU. And so on top of the security concerns and the economic concerns, they want to access the European economic system because it's more prosperous than the Russian economic system. They want that access to stronger labor markets. They want to see the increases in their own labor standards. They want access to a visa-free travel in Europe so you go overseas and work. So it's not only about American and European labor interests and slipping capital. It's also about Ukrainian interests in economics, which is with the European Union, is with these quote unquote Western countries. I hate this from Western countries, but yeah.
If the Ukrainians are successful in pushing back the Russian invasion, their economic, their newfound economic freedom will forever be tied to the United States. And it's economic expansion and it's economic benefit.
They're not going to really have much of a choice at that point because, like,
they already don't.
We've done so much in terms of like providing aid and support and stuff. Deals have been already brokered for like, hey, once this is all said and done, we're going to get this deal and we're going to have these companies come here and do these things and, so on and so forth. There's no fucking
the Ukrainian government very much is trying very hard to convince Europe companies throughout the world to come to Ukraine and help them rebuild.
Right, and I'm sure the
rebuilding cost is going to be in the trillions.
I'm sure plenty of those companies have already fucking gleefully, salivated and signed on for that. So
I actually not really. The difficult thing is if you're a company.
Maybe not openly yet, but like, it's like the problem is probably like provisionally like, hey, assuming this, that, and the other thing happens, we got this contract.
Yeah, some of it's assuming. I would say that's probably closer to reality because a lot of these companies don't want to invest in Ukraine because it's a risk. Like Ukraine is a country at war. Ukraine, while it's
wait a minute, you're the one saying that you're the one that's arguing for intervention. So you think that America and Russia should decide the fate of Ukraine. Well, so that doesn't make sense.
What?
Oh, I'm sorry. I was responding to Danny Smith's comment. I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead.
Oh, no worries. Fuck. What was I gonna say?
Oh shit. I'm sorry. I'm so disruptive.
It's okay. That's okay. Damn, I lost it.
Yeah, I'm a real wrecking ball for trains of thought.
But it is that is true that right now Ukraine doesn't have an option to be like, we're gonna go our own way. It really is in a position where it has to choose, and they've made a choice. And if they've made that choice, I think it's a
shitty choice for Ukraine. I mean, like, look, I get it, lesser two evils, blah, blah, blah. But really, at the end of the day, it's like Mother Russia's like, hey, real Ukraine, you suck my dick, and Russia, America's like, hey, you don't have to suck that big, nasty Russian dick. You can suck my all red, wine, blue American dick, but I'll romance you first. I'll buy you.
It's not really a choice.
Yeah.
So arguing that they have the right to make their choice within those constraints is kind of.
I mean, like it's a shitty. I mean, it's pretty much a catch-22. I guess there's one side of the 22 that's a little worse than the other, maybe depending on how you look at it. But
a little worse. Okay, I'm gonna be blunt. This I think we're downplaying the difference here.
You're downplaying the fucking how bad America really can be.
I think this is just a lack of experience on your half. Earlier it was the age thing. I think it's a lack of experience with how brutal the Russian occupation is here in comparison to look. I don't know what you think the American companies are going to do here. We're not going to go into your home, take your child, kidnap them, bring them back to America and say, you can't talk to them. They're Americans now.
Yeah, they're not going to do that specific thing.
They're not only going to do that.
They're not other things, though.
Are they going to fill up mass graves? Are they going to engage in large scale flooding and
maybe
ecocide? I don't know.
Slow. I mean, that's war crime shit. We're talking about how they're going to govern, not how they're going to act at war.
So
we're talking about what Russia's going to do if it controls Ukraine. We're not talking about what Russia is doing right now when they're at war with Ukraine.
Also, much of, and this is actually a criticism of Ukrainians, not of Ukrainians, but of the Ukrainian government. much of, I think, the neoliberal reforms that are probably going to happen once this war is over is also because Zelensky himself is like a neoliberal. He's a very
well.
he's
Explain
a
why then.
he's
faggot.
a very he's a very centristy, very neoliberal type guy. Very, I think one of the things he wants, it's like almost like Reagan shit. It's like for every single regulation we put into place, we have to take 2 regulations off the book. This is the type of stuff that Zelensky's party wants to reform Ukraine into. That is the Ukrainians voting for Zelensky, choosing him to take that economic path.
America
right?
bad. We get it.
That is very that's very
Sorry.
different, I think.
I don't think that's on the
foreign,
ballot.
Than a foreign
That's-
army.
I don't think that's on the ballot for Ukrainians, Dylan.
I don't think
they get. I don't think they're going like, we want to be economically exploited by neoliberal government. They're choosing
I don't know what
Zelensky over another master. They're not. That's not on the ballot for them.
Well, number one, they voted for Zelensky, so he was on the ballot. I don't know, like that's literally
He's on
what
the ballot. Whether or
Yes.
not Ukraine becomes a subsidiary of the United States is not on the ballot.
Actually, well, whether or not it's
Once again,
actually,
Dan, that's what you
I
want.
don't. I think actually NATO membership usually comes with a vote. I think that was the case in Poland. That was the case in Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. So there might be a decent chance it's going to have a vote that will win.
TJ,
because the
please
vast
don't read
majority
this
of-
comment aloud and ruin the flow of the conversation. Okay, I won't.
Thank you. The fuck.
He did it again.
No, I did it. That time it was on purpose. Sorry.
You're such a gremlin, TJ.
I know. You got to fucking throw a little sand in his eye
Right.
every now and then, you know?
Fuck. What was I saying?
I don't know. Bunch of goddamn gibberish. No, probably something erudite and intelligent and articulate.
We
But now
were
it's
talking about
gone.
how Zelensky was on the ballot, not American.
Oh,
hegemony.
yeah.
You
So,
probably
the
didn't
majority-
call the currency of Russia rupees or anything.
If
so
you look
you're
at the
good.
look at the polling data, we're talking like 80 to 85% supporting NATO membership. We're talking like 60 to 70 to 80 to 90% supporting EU membership. They're the Ukrainian people. If you ask them, they've made their decision. Now, you could make the argument that, well, maybe if there was another scenario where they could be a neutral country with their own independent economic relationships, then they would make that choice. But the world is a tough fucking place, and you live in a tough fucking place where one of your neighbors are actively engaged in a war of annihilation against you, and the other one's like, fine, you can join the club after you beat them.
Yeah,
It's already
nothing
a
we
rough
can do.
deal. It's
Nothing
a
we
rough
can do.
deal, but that's one of 2 options that they have, and they're going with the option that allows them to have more sovereignty over their country, that their families are not being dumped in mass graves, and their children aren't being kidnapped to be Russified with their culture erased. And I think that's honestly a rational choice for them to be picking.
I mean, yeah, I guess within that paradigm, I mean, like if you're fucking got like, hey, I'm gonna beat you to death with a fucking tire iron. It's like, hey, I'm gonna slowly bleed you to death by 1,000 cuts. It's like, I guess
What can
I guess
actually let me
I'll
ask
take-
you?
I guess
What's
I'll take that death over that one. I don't know. Yeah, sure.
what's gonna do you think that once this war is over and everything is said and done, that the living standard in Ukraine is going to, from pre-war, from 2013, let's say Yanukovych, from before the first Russian invasion,
you're
you think the
about-
living standard?
I can already tell just by the setup of this question that you're about to ask me something that's above my pay grade. So,
Okay,
'cause
so
I don't know what the fucking condition in Ukraine was like because I didn't give a shit about Ukraine, you know, before this war happened. I didn't know anything about it, so I don't know.
I think there's a really good chance that once this war is over, the living standard in Ukraine could rapidly skyrocket with access to Western markets, membership in the European Union, and also the protection of NATO, meaning that Western investors are like, oh, they have the protection of NATO. Our investments are safe. They're not going to be blown up
I mean, there's
by a
parts of
Russian
our
military jet.
there's parts of our own country that have direct access to Western markets because they're right here in America. There's people who like basically live in like abject third world fucking poverty in this country. And, you know, I don't know. It just doesn't seem like the system that we set up in America doesn't really seem to be to the benefit of the people. I don't see why we would set up a system there that would be to the benefit of the people.
I mean, the living standard in the United States is much higher than the living standard in Ukraine. I think that
I mean,
the
there's-
ways that we
I mean,
govern
I don't know.
labor
I'd have to take
regulate.
your word for it, but I know there's a lot of people in this country that live in conditions of absolute squalor. And I've seen how, I mean, from what I could tell of how Ukrainians are living, looking at their cities and looking at the domiciles I've seen in news footage and stuff, like it seems like their lifestyle is already like somewhat comparable to Americans.
No.
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 So
I
what?
mean,
What? Like, tell me about the average Ukrainian, like, living space. Like, what do they
Um,
not have that Americans have? Like, what? How they living over there? Like,
how
not necessarily during the war, but like pre-war.
pre-war?
Yeah, like immediately before the war.
I'm
How's the average Ukrainian? What's the
I'm
average
curious about
Ukrainian's
this too. 'Cause
lifestyle?
I've seen footage of pre-war Kiev, and
Like, it's like,
it looks better than a lot of American cities I've
Well,
seen. So
of
Right,
course,
so-
well, of course, but you're seeing videos specifically meant to highlight the best parts of Ukraine that were ruined by the Russian invasion.
Sure,
right?
but if
you're
you
not
took the
meant to
best-
see the
if you
back
took the best
streets
parts
of,
of-
Mhm.
if you took the best parts of Bastrop, Louisiana, and put it up against the best parts of Kiev, Ukraine,
Well,
it's
yeah,
gonna
you're taking
fucking be-
you're taking the economic capital of the nation and comparing it to like the most backwater of American backwaters. My statement about Ukraine being able to possibly like prosper economically after this war isn't a statement that all poverty will go away.
Well, I just want
and
to know.
that, like,
I just want to know
all-
how they're living like now. I want because I have no idea.
Like right now or before the war.
Before the war.
Before the war, there was a big issues with corruption. Corruption was a gigantic
Well, I mean,
issue.
but I want
on
to
a
know like
base-
specifically like on a fundamental like level of just like their house, the things they have.
What do we got that they ain't got?
Yeah, like what is the difference of the average American versus average Ukrainian lifestyle? I know what I kind of have an idea what the average, I guess, is in America. I mean, I
Okay,
guess that depends
I'm
radically
trying
on
to-
where you're from and stuff. But like, I don't know, like what, like Ukrainian, they have television, they have internet,
Well, it's going to be a lot
reliable
harder.
fucking power grid. Like, what do they got? What do they not have?
Well, they do have internet. They do have internet. They do have like refrigeration. They have like the most basic of like. They're not like living in huts, right? Let me be. They
Right,
aren't.
obviously, they're not living in fucking huts.
They're not
and
living
shit.
in huts. But when it comes to things like starting a business, the access to capital, the amount of red hoops you got to jump through due to local corruption, the amount of problems you're going to have with organized crime if you're doing it in somewhere like Odessa, which is really big in the Odessan mafia.
Mhm.
Problems with, I think, just quality of medical care, which has improved actually. I think over the last few years, problems with access to medical care, worker protections, like across the board.
A lot of that sounds a lot like fucking a lot of parts of America I've been to be honest with you. But
Yeah, most Americans don't have access to the capital needed to start a small business. Most Americans have to deal with things like organized crime. There's a huge segment of the population that you could apply everything
Okay,
you just said directly to.
I don't know how. Okay, if you want, we can pull up and I can like talk about life expectancy compared to like the average income of the Ukrainians, but the living standard in Ukraine right now
less
is
gun
not the
deaths in
best.
Ukraine. Yeah, that's probably true. Well, of course, right now it's wartime, but
I mean, I don't know what I'm supposed to. So like, you just want to know like, oh, they have they have more cars. Like we have more cars in them. Like, what do you want me to
yeah,
compare
that's
exactly?
that's it. Yeah, I just want to know like what I want to know like average Ukrainian, average American, like what does the average American have access to the average Ukrainian does not have access to pre-war?
Second, let me just. I can just. Do you want me to just compare like average salaries or?
Well, I don't. I mean,
Well,
salary,
like
the
living-
salary
like
doesn't- I
just-
mean, not necessarily because like things could be cheaper in that marketplace and stuff. Like so.
Let me ask you some questions,
Uh-huh.
and we'll see if we can line this out.
All right, let's figure this
I
out.
walk into the average Ukrainian pre-war domicile.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a couch?
Maybe, probably. You
Okay.
probably have a couch, yeah.
Is there a little stand with a fucking TV on it or some sort of entertainment thing?
Probably. It might not be like a flat screen, might be one
Right.
of those old retro types, but yeah.
So far we're on par. I'm a Ukrainian diabetic.
Mm-hmm.
Can I get insulin?
Probably.
Okay.
I mean,
So far on par. I'm a Ukrainian cancer patient. Can I get treatment?
it depends on your income level.
Doesn't Ukraine have one of the best because of like its history with nuclear fallout and shit? Don't they have a pretty good cancer infrastructure there?
They have a decent cancer infrastructure, but if you're talking like long-term cancer treatment, it's still going to be pretty expensive.
Sure. Same thing in America. I'm trying to think. Do they have a vehicle?
Do you have a
Do they
vehicle?
need well, first let me ask, do they need a vehicle or is public transit better laid out there?
It depends where you are. If you're like in a major city, public transit's going to be pretty good. You can use the trains and stuff like that.
Mhm.
But a lot of communities, like it could still be like an hour and a half to get to work. It could still be
So
like an hour to get to work.
on par with America.
I think I
walk
do.
into your
The average
kitchen and I
American,
open.
the average American has more money to spend on cars than the average Ukrainian.
Sure.
I
So
sure.
is the main difference just like the things they have tend to be a little bit older, a little bit more worn down?
A lot of
They don't-
times, yeah.
They don't have access to maybe quite as much money as maybe some Americans do. I mean, I guess we should just, I mean, like statistically speaking, like what is the difference of in average, income?
I think the main differences would probably be besides income, probably I think educational opportunities is probably going to be a big difference. In Ukraine right now, if you're a teacher, you're making like probably about $150 in some of these like village communities
Mhm.
per month. Definitely now with the war popping off, with many local educational centers actually telling their teachers not to take overtime, take as much time off, because if you don't take time off, they're not going to have enough money to pay you, and then they're going to have to close down the school. This is
Sure.
due to a lot more money going to, of course, defense and like military spending, and also just longstanding issues with there not being enough funding for education. And a lot of public services are like that. And those issues have also been compounded by, honestly, like more than 2 decades of corruption. And that's ignoring the Soviet corruption just since 1991, since Ukraine's been independent. That's on top of like a lower, probably median salary than we're going to have in the United States. So I'm trying to think of like other things. I think the thing that would be easiest, because maybe it's because my community is full of like a lot of gamers and Twitch viewers. If I'm like, they can't afford this video game, but you can afford it. But a lot of when it comes to consumer products, it just depends on how much you save. Like anyone can like, eventually get a consumer product here, but it's going to be a lot more difficult for the average worker to get like the average consumer product.
So you think that they have to work a little bit longer to get the same product?
Yeah, usually.
Okay.
But also, let's
do
just
Ukrainians
say,
have air fryers? I'm assuming they probably. I mean, maybe some. do.
I actually
don't know.
haven't seen an air fryer here. Actually,
I don't even know if that's like that market has really been opened up there.
That's kind of
Maybe.
a fad, man. Those are just taking off here,
Yeah. So,
I-
They're just
do
now
also-
starting to get in the air fryer
I-
generation.
I do also want to say that under Russian occupation, the economic opportunities that will be available are not very plentiful. While right now in liberated, in like what I guess we call it free Ukraine, outside of occupied Ukraine, whatever you want to call it, in Ukrainian controlled Ukrainian territory, while the economy has worsened due to the invasion, of course, your country's getting bombed. In occupied territory, there are no job opportunities. There is a gigantic exodus of everybody trying to get the fuck out of there, trying to either go to other countries as a displaced person, or they're trying to get into like
well, yeah, but I mean,
Ukrainian controlled territory.
Russia's
They're-
not really going to be putting too much resources into infrastructure or anything that for territory they might easily lose again. So
They have invested some infrastructure into Mariupol. I think sometimes people exaggerate it. Either way, though, I don't think that if the Ukrainians were able to have control of their own legislator and control of their own country and determine their own economic future versus them being occupied by a foreign power and having their economic policy dictated to them by the Russian government directly, which is what happened in 2014 and started this whole, Euromaidan revolution and spiraled out of control from there in the first place. I don't think that's going to be the most economically prosperous future for Ukrainians, and that's not the future they want. While there are going to be economic interests again and capital in the West are going to try to push Ukraine in a certain way, at the end of the day, the laws that are introduced end on the table of the Ukrainian Rada, the Ukrainian parliament, and the Ukrainian presidency. Under occupation, that is not the case. It is dictated by a foreign power directly through occupation.
Danny Smith.
Danny, we have never. I'm sorry. I think we keep trying to hit it at the same time. You go ahead.
Who's Danny Smith? Is he backing me up and bullying you guys?
Yeah, he's
pissing us off.
he's riding with
Good job,
Dylan,
Danny.
for sure.
Keep fucking him. Keep fucking him, Danny.
But no, Danny Smith, if you put words in my mouth that I never said and put quotations around them one more fucking time, I'm going to shit ban you so hard your great grandma will spin in her fucking grave. Okay? You can argue against me all you want. There's plenty of people doing it, but my eye keeps getting drawn to you because I keep seeing things attributed to me that I never fucking said. So do it. You're on notice now, bitch. One more fucking time, and I'm gonna dumpster your fucking ass. How about
Danny,
that?
Send me your PayPal. I'll pay you $20 to do it.
Hey, it's worth it. Do it, Danny. If I have my way and Dylan doesn't intercede, you ain't getting paid shit.
That is
So I'd
true.
take him up on that.
Fuzzle Buzzle is the biggest blanking plank I have ever seen in a chat. Get this man some oxygen. He's been deprived of it his entire life. I don't even know who you've spent $5 just to fucking shout out someone else and then shout down someone else in the chat. I mean, hey, it's admirable.
I mean, that's fucking whatever, man. Hey, thanks for the $5, bro. Am I so maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you feel this is an unfair characterization of you, but I feel like that one of the main differences between your position and my position and TJ's position is you are far more optimistic about America and its influence in foreign countries than we are. Would you think that's an unfair thing to say?
I am more optimistic in the way that I think that it isn't impossible for us to do good on the world stage.
Okay. Well, that answers my question then. That answers my question. I would argue that the world is littered with former projects of the United States that ain't doing too well on the world stage, but maybe this time though,
this gets me passionate though, because people try to paint Ukraine as if it's like an American project, but every single time we have been trying to get the Ukrainians to compromise on their own freedom, and they have said no. During Euromaidan, we wanted them to accept the deal that the Russian-backed president, Viktor Yanukovych, offered them, while he was also trying to ban protesting, literally make it illegal for more than 3 people to gather as his literal armed thugs, Tatushky. I don't know if you knew this, but the government, the Russian-backed government of Yanukovych, hired actual gangsters, like MS-13 style gangsters, to go out there and corral the protesters. And during that protest movement, we were like happy to see like Yanukovych challenged, but we just wanted them to accept a deal because we didn't want anything to get too chaotic. We didn't know if they could get more than that, and we were like, we want them just to take the deal. They didn't take the deal. They kept going, which eventually led to Yanukovych fleeing the country. That was the Euromaidan was a Ukrainian project, and Ukrainians are defending Ukrainian democracy and Ukrainian freedom. We are assisting them in defending a Ukrainian project.
Dylan, I want to ask you this. When you look at this entire situation there, and you predict what you think will happen, not necessarily what you want to happen, but when you...
I try to not make many predictions, actually. I try very hard not to make predictions, but I'll make one if you want me to.
Fair enough. But I'm still kind of curious, so I'll take it with that grain of salt. But what do you think? What do you expect to happen here? Like, what do you think the ultimate outcome? I mean, I guess there's no ultimate outcome because, it's going to continue on and on. But like, where do you see this sort of like chapter of this Russian invasion of Ukraine? Where do you see that ending?
It's really hard to say because so many elements of this war can change at the drop of a hat.
Sure.
I think a lot of it depends on how much the United States stays in Ukraine's corner. If we send things like ATACMS, if we continue to send a steady flow, and if the Biden administration is serious about what it meant when it talked about the cluster munitions, that this is a transitionary period until we up production enough to sustain the Ukrainians, then that sounds like the American government's in it for the long haul. And if European governments are in the same boat as the United States, outside of like Viktor Orban's Hungary, right? Then I think Ukraine has a really decent chance at liberating its territory, because that is a gigantic economic block in their corner. So not only can Ukraine probably keep itself afloat economically, but as these war economies pick up pace, they're going to be able to supply Ukraine, and hopefully they can succeed in their counteroffensive. But the main problem that I'm running into in my community is sometimes people are super optimistic to the point where it's like the war's already been won. That the long arc of history bends towards justice, and the Ukrainian people have shown such resilience that it can be compared to like the Vietnamese or the Afghans. That resilience is so heavy that Russian loss is inevitable. I don't think that's the case. I do believe, from looking at the Russian occupation, that they entirely plan to completely reshape all the occupied territory into a Russian colony, as in deporting everybody that opposes them, arresting everybody that opposes them, killing everybody that opposes them, or torturing those or hurting those into submission, and enforcing their culture against the native culture of Ukrainians. I do think that's their plan. And if they deport enough people, and if they are brutal enough in those methods, there is a possibility that there's just literally no one left to oppose them, and they replace them all with settlers. We've seen this in history before. We saw it with the United States, an expansion into Native American territories. We've seen it in the Russian government do it before in Crimea in the 1950s under Stalin's regime, when they deported
Israel and Palestine.
Israel and Palestine to a large extent with illegal settlement expansion. And so that right there scares me, because right now there is active resistance in occupied territory, car bombings, assassinations, information being funneled to the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense to target Russian soldiers. But if they are brutal enough in the occupation for a long enough period of time without liberation, there could come a day where there's not really many people to liberate. And that would be an unbelievable tragedy if they were able to just radically reshape and gut one-fifth of the country and some of the most economically prosperous parts of Ukraine as well. Crimea, Zaporozhye, Kherson, and Donetsk and Luhansk. These are economically productive parts of the economy that they're just gutting from Ukraine, crippling it in a way.
That's already an unbelievable tragedy, what's going on in Ukraine. Not just for Ukrainians, but for Russian soldiers who are, in the very same position in my mind. They are being used as pawns by geopolitical oligarchs, and they're dying, and their sons and daughters, husbands and wives, friends that people will never speak again to. That's an unbelievable tragedy, no matter where it happens, no matter what the auspice is.
I don't know how much I would agree with the idea that they're both pawns of the same. I do think what cause you're fighting for is important, but I will agree that every death is a tragedy, and a lot of these people are being sent. They're not like members of volunteer battalions. They're people who have been drafted and sent off to die with no plan of doing that themselves if they weren't forced to. And that type of stuff is a tragedy. And I wish all those people could go back to their homes and spend times with their wives, and they could end all of this nasty war business as soon as possible.
We agree on that if we can agree on nothing else.
I do just lastly want to say about the future of this war. This war is far from won, and that's part of the reason why I talk about it so much, is because I believe people need to focus on it, because Ukraine fatigue is a real thing. And if people don't know, I think, how bad the situation is, it's very hard to keep people kind of their eye on the ball. At least when it comes to the American public. The government seems to have its eye on the ball to some degree, but I want to make sure that the public stays informed on what's going on there in large part, because I really desperately want to see whatever future the Ukrainian people have, it be a prosperous one. It'd be a prosperous one. It'd be a successful one. It'd be one where they're safe and they can have their own country and live whatever way they want to, even if it's not in NATO and not with the West.
Yeah. I agree. Let's think about them. Why not? Why shouldn't we think about the?
What do you think the average person on
be like they're all monsters, they're all evil, they're pure evil?
The average Russian soldier is just bloodthirsty about
born bad.
They just fucking came out of the womb hating Ukrainians and wanting to fucking kill them. No,
Ukraine.
Oh, sorry, Ukrainians.
It's rupees and it's Ukrainian, dude.
So Dylan, what do you think? You want to hang out with us? You want to hang out with us? And, go ahead.
One last thing on this. I don't know how this war will end, because I don't have a crystal ball. I know how I would like it to end, but it is dependent entirely upon the West's and Ukraine's allies' attention span and level of commitment and willpower, and how much it will stand with it. The longer it stands with it and more committed it is to stand with Ukraine, the better deal and better off they're going to be probably in the long run when it comes to what they get at the negotiating table, or if they liberate their territory. And the less interested, the less motivated they are, the more up shit creek Ukraine's going to be. That's the only 100% accurate prediction I know I can make, is that is going to be one of the main determining factors. What was the question you asked me, Paul?
I was going to ask you. Well, hold on one second. TJ, can you fucking tutor me on how to dodge this type of fucking criticism, because it seems like you and me have pretty much agreed on, I would say 98% of what we've talked about tonight. And yet the chat is full of Paul's fucking so wrong on it. Like, how do you fucking offer the same exact opinions as me?
It
with
could
the same
just be-
fervor
It could
and
just be
sneak around any
because-
fucking blowback.
Because
I just convinced
think
them all.
there's-
That's
two-
the obvious truth.
Well, there's two reasons why. So the first reason is I'm a little bit more diplomatic than you. The second reason why is I'm willing to just like be the fucking clown and shit sometimes. So it's like, whatever, I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about, but here's my dumbass opinion. So, you know, I'm a little bit more like less like forceful and like, I'm fucking right. My whole point is like, I'm probably not right. And probably Dylan isn't right either. And probably you're not right. We're probably all fucking wrong. And what's going to happen is going to be something that none of us even predicted or foresaw. And that's my basic belief. So
Why is Paul so focused? I don't know. It's not like I'm doing a show where I'm having a
yeah,
fucking
Paul,
political discussion with
quit
somebody
paying
in front of a
attention to
bunch
what's
of people.
going on, Paul.
Yeah, I should have tuned out
Stab.
long ago. You got me there, dude. Yeah, why don't you come sit in and do my job for me?
All right. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed watching and listening to that as much as I enjoyed participating in it. And I just want to ask you once again, in case you didn't listen to me in the beginning, to click down on that link below. Go to the Onion Nuggets channel and subscribe to that. Or if you want to see full episodes of Onion Nuggets, please join our Patreon for $7 a month. Much love.